We're a little bit late, but it's all good. We can do whatever we want to. All right, I think we're on live. Yes, we're on live, ladies and gents. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Aboriginal Originals, the platform where Indigenous and African American people are coming together to have very unapologetic conversations regarding both of our communities. This platform is so that creation, collaboration, as well as reconnection can take place. And we hope that you enjoy the conversation, because we are here to get it on and popping. All right. And so before we get started, I want to go ahead and do a land acknowledgement. I am on Piscatawayan land. That is where I am hosting or presenting this live stream from. And so it is our responsibility to definitely pay reverence and give acknowledgement to the people's land that we are on, and our responsibility to know who they are, where they are, what their issues are, and also our responsibility is to figure out how can we support the Indigenous community, and especially those whose land we're actually on. Land acknowledgement also expands or is connected to the way also we treat the environment that we treat the land that we're living on, because the caretakers of this hemisphere, this nation, they are still under occupation. They are continuing to resist, but because we're also here, it is our responsibility to help them to be able to keep the land that we're on sustainable. And so I want to go ahead and us get started with the conversation for tonight. So tonight we are going to dig in. We're going to dig in regarding Christianity versus that of Aboriginal spirituality, because we have a large segment of our population in the Indigenous as well as the African American community that prescribe to Christianity, a religion that for many of us replaced our original or our Aboriginal spirituality. It was done through force, and the impact can still be felt in a very, and I'm gonna just go ahead and say, in a very damaging way. I'm not gonna say in a positive way, because with that positivity came a continual destruction of a people and culture that also opened up the door to very poor, dehumanizing mistreatment of our people. And I think depending on who you ask, one could say that there are more negatives to the imposition of Christianity in both of our communities than positives. And so I would like for us to examine and to explore that conversation this evening. There are going to be those who are going to say we are Christian bashing. I don't give a fuck. I'm sorry. I know I said, well, I don't care, because I think that if you are offended by this, this conversation, then I would say to do soul searching for yourself, especially if it is you feeling that your religion is better than that of the Aboriginal spirituality of the Indigenous and the African American. Excuse me, not African American, because we didn't have a religion or a spirituality, of the African spirituality that was removed from the African American community. And so I would like for us to begin the conversation. I don't have a question. I want y'all to jump in wherever you want to, and we'll just let it flow, let it evolve. Don't put me on pause now.
So growing up, I had a friend who was Christian. I don't have a problem with religion or spirituality in general. Religion, though, I felt, and she would kind of just act like she was better than me all the time. And that kind of was my first. I was maybe 5 something, and she said, well, I do this. And I just kind of got turned off at the beginning. So yeah, I think it's taught to our children or to people's children. You know, here religion is passed down, and I think the same ideologies and negative connotations are still passed on. And it hurts people who aren't of the Christian faith in society.
So basically what I heard from you is that when the Christianity comes from a superiority, has a superiority complex that supports it. And I would say I absolutely agree with it. Like when you have conversations, I've had individuals go, and ain't nothing better than my God. I'm like, you can say that you can say that without that type of energy that comes with it. You know, because I think that sometimes there is an energy that comes with Christianity when it is spoken of by the people who actually follow it. And so, oh, Lindsay, I would definitely agree with you. Yeah, girl, you own the money.
See, there wasn't a guiding question. So like, I don't know where you want me to start because, you know, I have a lot of feelings.
Wherever, girl, you know, we women's, we do whatever we want, whatever.
Well, the forefront of my mind actually is I'm in the process of interviewing the last like elders of my community about my home church. So this is a timely discussion. But like I just interviewed one last night and took notes into the recording and everything. But I grew up the way my mom is. I grew up with the obligation of having to go to church, not really, you know, because she saw it as an obligation because of our elders and whatnot. But I like religion as a concept, but organized religion and I aren't the best of friends. It's probably the nicest way to put it.
I would like to say something. I come from a Christian background, and I would have to say that unfortunately, many people have been conditioned to be fearful of the unknown, right? And so if you don't know something and you haven't experienced it, all you know is what your pastor or your minister said, what you should stay away from, because it's going to lead you down the wrong path. And I find now in life that I've been breaking a lot of rules lately, and my spiritual growth has like skyrocketed. Not saying I'm going around hurting people, but I'm not in that mindset of being fearful of the unknown. Like, for instance, the new moon was Friday on Juneteenth, right? On Juneteenth, okay? Queen Bee put out a track, okay? Talking about her Oshun energy or Oya, whatever, right? Right? She charges her crystals in the full moon. I was like, wait a minute here, wait a minute. And again, I don't want to get off on that topic, but at the same time, timing is everything. Timing is everything. And again, Juneteenth on a new moon, 369. 9 is the return, the return of the 9, which is, and I'm still learning all this stuff. I'm not saying I know all of this stuff, but I'm learning more about the significance of 369. And 9 is philanthropy and healing and all that stuff. All of this was going down last week. All of this. And to just stay in that fearful mindset, in my opinion, is very limiting. And in order to evolve to the next dimension or what have you, so you can grow spiritually, sometimes you're going to have to get outside of that box, of that safety box, and explore and experience the great I am, or whatever name you want to assign to it. So for me personally, I've grown so much spiritually over the years by just stepping out of that box of, stay here, stay safe. Anything else out there that's not of the Bible, which in my opinion has been altered in so many ways. There is some truth in there, and I'm not going to take that away from the scripture, but I believe God speaks, or the great I am, a goddess, or whatever you want to call it, that great energy source speaks to us very uniquely. Everyone has some type of connection, some type of spiritual gift. And sometimes when you're in an organized religion, it limits you, unfortunately. It's very limiting. And see, I have gifts, and I've gone to people within the church family, asking them questions, and they looking at me like I'm crazy, because they're fearful of it, and they was taught not to entertain that.
Mm-hmm.
And then back to African spirituality, or Aboriginal spirituality, wherever on the planet, on the globe, right? They had experiences with the source in their own way. And so I believe that many of us need to get back to that, and not to throw that away, because that's what helped our ancestors get through the hell they went through. Period. So that's my 2 cents.
And can I jump in real quick with what you said, Erica? I want to segue, or not segue, but piggyback off what you said about the gifts portion, and about how you said you were talking to people in your church. So let me tell you what I find so interesting about that is that, you know, in the church, it is literally villainized to have a gift. It is seen as the work of the devil.
Yes,
You know
unless
what
you're a prophet, right?
Exactly.
That's a loophole right there.
Exactly.
Prophet, right?
Exactly. And you know what I find interesting is it even goes to tell you how much the people who are not only subscribing to Christianity, as well as those who are preaching it. In the Bible, it says that if you have a gift, it is your responsibility to master it to the best of your ability.
Know thyself. How can you know yourself if you're limiting?
I know,
yourself?
Exactly. And when I read that about it saying if you had a gift, you know what I mean? And then it even gave an example. And I think it even mentions, like, if you have the gift of prophecy or something like that. And I remember when I read that, I remember going, wait a minute, hold up. I was like, now, if I have a gift, I told that I'm the devil. But the Bible says that if I have a gift, I'm supposed to be honing it.
Yeah.
And for me, and then that aspect of this is like, it was me reading that. I remember thinking, I've got to step back from this. You know what I mean? I have to step back from this, because also too, at the same time, I was starting in the beginnings of trying to delve into my own ancestry, you know, with the spiritual aspect of it. And I remember thinking, there's no way I'm going to be able to be successful with doing what I need to do and give my whole energy and essence to it if I keep staying here in the Bible, because the Bible goes against everything that is indicative to Aboriginal spirituality. You know, and so I recognize that, okay, I got to step back from it. Don't get it twisted. I still believe in Jesus, but I think he may be the only thing. Well, that ain't his real name, but that may be the only thing, you know, that I am subscribing to. And the only reason why that is because I know that Yeshua is a certain type of power. I know that Yeshua is a part of the Trinity. But I also recognize that the Trinity is something that goes back to ancient times prior to Christianity. And I'm trying to figure out, where is Yeshua at in the line of things, because Yeshua's presence is connected to African spirituality and indigenous spirituality. And so my thing is, especially because, you know, and I'm about to stop, but I don't know if you guys are aware of this. You know how I get shit. You know, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but, you know, when the Europeans came over here, when they first start coming over here, remember, their biggest platform is about how they're Christians, and that when they're coming over here, they're getting exposed to the indigenous peoples, and they're calling them pagans and saying that they're eating people, practicing cannibalism, that they don't know anything about, you know, Christianity, they don't know nothing about Jesus, God, da 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 da. Yeah, that ends up being being a lie. What happens is that they start getting exposed to things that shows that they knew something about, quote unquote, I don't like to call it Christianity because I don't think it's Christianity, but they even had altars of, quote unquote, Baal over here, and they were destroyed. Also too, in the New England area, there is this, I don't want to call it a story, but I'm gonna use the term story, but there is a spiritual story that is told about how it's similar to that of where someone came across the water and basically told them of Yeshua's birth. And what that looked like. And the term Yeshua is not called Yeshua, but basically that story is basically runs in alignment to the story we have in the Bible of Jesus's birth.
Yeah.
You know, and when the Christians heard that, they did everything that they could to hide that kind of shit. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so it lets me know that whatever Yeshua's role is, it's very, very deep. And I don't know how we go about trying to figure that out, because we are in such a colonized place right now in space. And so I just think that that's something to kind of ponder in our minds as we're having these conversations, because yeah.
Can I add one other thing before you move on?
I'm done.
Also, the Magi, right? Right. Astrology, right?
Girl, don't get me started.
Okay. The stars. Okay. Symbols, signs, all of this type of stuff, right?
In the Bible.
Right. And I'm like saying to myself, okay, I want to know more about the Magi. Why is there only one paragraph about the Magi? I want to know more about their story, right? They brought incense and oil, essential oils and things of that nature. But apparently crystals, like, you know, stones and oils and incense is evil, right? Right. But yet in the Bible, it's okay when it was brought as gifts to the baby. Right. So it's like, for me, again, I come from a Christian background, but I am in the process of decoding. I'm digging underneath the surface to learn more about what did that really mean versus the surfacey stuff. So that's where I am right now. And not just Christianity, but I'm trying to connect the dots, right? Because not one particular group has all the answers. I believe we all have a piece of that puzzle, and we just need to bring it together to find ourselves, right?
I'm already loving this conversation. I'm just over here like, I don't know, like a kid in a candy store. But I'll start by saying that I was also raised in a Christian household, and then my father is actually also Muslim. And my mom always taught me about being Indigenous. And I want to kind of steer the conversation into you know, the fact that spirituality is such an integral part of culture too. So when all those things were stripped away from us, they didn't just strip away our spiritualities and the way that we prayed, but they also stripped away like the way we knew about medicines, the way we knew about science, just all these different ways of knowing. So all those things were suppressed along with like the eradication of our spirituality. So I wanted to kind of into that a little bit.
And Amina, what it did was, I think the Indigenous people have been better at retaining it, but for the African American culture, it stripped away our ability to be able to connect to Mother Nature and to really see Mother as a living source, and to recognize the power of the moon, the sun, the stars, and even like when the birds are chirping. Like, I don't think that people recognize that sometimes animals are trying to communicate to us and we don't even know it. Like, we literally don't know it. We see them as a nuisance. Even insects, like there used to be a time where I didn't like to be near nature, because we had a love-hate relationship in West Virginia. Okay. And so, but I remember sometimes, you know, like when I would be in certain places in nature, I always felt like I was under attack. And sometimes, shit, I had to fight a damn ant one time over a damn blackberry, but that's another conversation one other time. And that son of a bitch bit me, okay? And I know I'm kind of going everywhere with this, but since I have tapped in to my to the, and I always call it the universal aspect of spirituality, because there is a difference between universal spirituality, which all cultures have, and then there's another difference between ancestral spirituality. You know what I mean? Because ancestral spirituality is very, very personal, and it is only meant for that group of people. You know what I mean? And I know we don't like to have these conversations, but it just is.
But
and
we need to.
Yeah, and we really do, you know, and so the universal aspect of spirituality, once I started being able to tap into that, allowed me to be able to open up myself to recognizing that it was okay to step away from Christianity. When I started to tap into my ancestral spirituality, it was a whole different ballgame. You know what I mean? Because no longer did I come at my own people's spirituality from a historical place. I started to recognize it was a personal thing. And that's how I was going to start to be able to walk in the light of my ancestors the way I was supposed to. But let me tell you what it also did. To be African means to be one with nature, just like in the indigenous world. It means to have a recognition of that she is alive. And when I did that, and I started to literally be able to start having conversations and praying outside, sometimes, you guys, it's so funny. Now, when I, and I don't want to like to say pray, when I am having a conversation with an elder out here, you know, and I have my hands on that tree and I'm having this conversation. It used to be, first of all, the damn bugs, they mistreated me. They don't mistreat me no more. All right. Sometimes they will actually crawl on me and then crawl back off, you know, depending on how I like to say how strong the energy is. Secondly, sometimes when I am having these conversations, I don't even feel the insects when they are on me. It's not until I leave that sacred space that I was in that things start to change. And then I start to notice, oh, there's a bug on me. Oh, this thing, it might bite me, you know? And I recognize that Christianity usurped a lot of that from us. And it's interesting because in the Bible, it talks about, like, one of the things it talks about is how, you know, about, well, they give us a story of Adam, you know, and how he's able to sit amongst the animals and he names them or whatever. And I found it interesting because I remember thinking, so why can't we do that now? Like, why can't we, you know, be out here in Mother Nature and start and have certain types of relationships? And I'm not going to say with all animals, because I know you can't have a motherfucking relationship with a crocodile. All right, or with a scorpion, you know, I know this, but there are specific animals we should be able to, like, we should be able to sit out up under a damn tree and a rabbit come and hop on my damn lap, or at least hop near my feet and sit there and know that it can eat, and I'm not going to kick it. I'm not going to kill it. You know what I mean? Or do anything harmful to it in a very, I don't want to say negative way, because I know sometimes we eat these things, but there's still a balance and a relationship that goes with that. And I really believe that prior to 1492, I do think that our ancestors had those type of relationships. And I do think that colonialism, with the support of Christianity, broke those ties with our people and the matriarch. I just believe that.
I think that's something that transcends to all indigenous cultures, because I mean, even looking at well, then let's look at a religion like Buddhism, or even like parts of Ayurveda. There's more of a focus on optimizing yourself. Like, it's all about your own individual growth. Mm-hmm. And there's still that connection to earth, and there's still that connection to you know, achieving your own enlightenment. But I think, well, where I started to have issues going to church, and I'll be transparent and also say that Lindsay and I have come from a tribe that is very tied in with Christianity. And, you know, I respect people's choice to continue to, you know, connect with the source the way they want to. But personally, I had an issue with, you know, it just being used to pick and choose, like, who to hate and who to put into power. And I don't think people realize that, and they just take it at face value. There's no questioning. And I think we weren't put here to just absorb things. We're meant to question things. We're meant to ask, like, oh, is this what they actually meant? We're supposed to do our own research and like read the literature ourselves, and we're supposed to, and we have to remember that the Bible was written from the disciples' perspective. It wasn't necessarily written from Jesus. It was Jesus' story, but it wasn't his perspective or what he was probably thinking. But I don't know, it just started to make me question, why are we talking about people who are gay are going to hell? And that's the thing, like people who are not, I don't know, there's an agenda to it. So, it's like being politicized, but I don't know. Go ahead, Portia.
So I just wanted to, if nobody else has anything to say, I just wanted to listen to everybody's point of view before I added my 2 cents. Because so like everyone here, I was raised Baptist, and it wasn't by choice. It was kind of like anything else, like an indoctrination. Like you were born, you're raised by your parents, they know what they know, and then they raise you up to feel like, okay, this is what you're supposed to do, just same way they teach you right from wrong. And from a very young age, I had an issue with Christianity because it just seemed, it was like just a natural rejection, because like in the beginning, when you're in Sunday school, it's like, it's cool. They're telling you all the fun little stories and stuff like that. But then at the same time, they use fear to try to keep you in line. And I'm like, okay, my parents would teach me right from wrong and tell me what you're not supposed to do and why not, because it has consequences. You could get hurt, blah, 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 this. But I had an issue with being taught that everything that wasn't what this book was telling me to do could send me to hell. And I had a problem with being told that as a child, and then you can't ask questions, you can't question anything. And if you have issues or something's going on with you, or you just don't understand something, because there's always a why, like, okay, well, why can't I see this individual? Why can't I feel this person or this being or whatever it is, this spirit? It's like they would look at you sideways, like, are you questioning God? Are you questioning faith? Like, so I had a natural reaction to it, like, okay, this is just weird. This doesn't seem normal to me. And then growing up, of course, you learn more and you become grounded in it because you've been force-fed it for so long. But then you become an adult and you leave outside your household and you experience other people, other cultures, other religions. And if you're like, I want to say some of you people, I can tell, some of the people here today on this panel, I feel like you guys have vibrated at a different energy. I've personally, been around Allie, I've been around Amina, I've been around Sean. And so I feel like when you're around someone, you can feel an energy. You can feel like a transaction of energy and how they vibrate when you speak to them through conversation. And I feel like that's similar to how spirituality is in cultures a lot of ways, because that's how you connect with other people. And the same way, if I can stand next to someone and tell something's going on with them, like we always say, it's a good judge of character, or, there's all different ways that you can connect with both the earth, both what's going on around you, how you can get vibrational energy from things going wrong in the world. Or like, I have a severe case of like deja vu a lot of times. Like I could just be sitting here minding my own business, or I could be working and I will literally doze off and like be fully lucid, but doze off and then experience something. And it's gotten to a point now at 33 years of age that it's clear to me now. Like when I was growing up, it was very fuzzy. It was always happen in a nightmare. But now it's like I'm awake and things happen and then I see it and it's like, okay, something's gonna happen. I clearly know what it is. Let's see, I'm still trying to learn how to decipher if it's good or bad. So that's where I'm at now. But when I was young and I would like speak to my mom about it, it was like one of the other young ladies said, it was always painted a picture toward me like, okay, something's wrong with you. Or, I had a prophet tell my mother in church one day that I was gonna have the spirit of rebellion and I was gonna give her a whole bunch of problems in my teenage years. And it's like, I think that's called puberty, but I don't know if that's like you know, I didn't do drugs, I didn't sell drugs, I didn't have kids young. Like, I don't understand why that sort of thing is like taught and natural in religion. So when I started my journey with my father, he put a lot of books in front of me. And he was just like, all of the things that you're taking issue with from conversations we've had, it sounds to me like you're ready to go on this journey, this spiritual journey, and try to find what it is you're looking for. And the one thing I love about my dad is, regardless of what I need, he never tries to steer me in a direction. He's like, okay, this is where you seem like you're going, read this book, and then we'll talk about it and we'll have a discussion, and I'm interested to see your point of view. So he gave me this book called Ancient Egypt, The Light of the World by Gerald Bassey. And it's in Old World English, so it took me forever to get through like the first few chapters, because you literally have to like read a paragraph and then decipher it. But it made me realize how much in common all of these religions have, and where a lot of them derive from. And then I started looking up, you know, like the Greek and the European Renaissance, and like, you know, back in Rome and back in those days, like before we had any, you know, transatlantic slave trade and all this other stuff, and how religion was used politically. It was used to control people, and it was often rewritten by whoever was in power to push their agenda. It's the same way you elect administrations in our government today, and how they move around laws to benefit what they're trying to get across. And so I also had a problem growing up with Christianity, because I realized how rooted Christianity was in slavery. And then doing research and realizing that, you know, white people were enslaved for a long time, a lot longer than blacks were, but they don't know it. A lot of whites don't know their own history. And then they don't realize that this isn't nothing new to their own kind. Like, they enslaved themselves. And then the only difference between us and them was before race was a thing, they used religion. So if you were Christian, you couldn't be enslaved. If even in some Muslim cultures, or some Muslim empires, if you were non-Muslim, that gave them a clearing for you to be enslaved. And then they would gain more land and for them to be able to spread and grow their empire that way. And then it turned into, okay, now it's political gain, it's financial gain. That's all they were trying to do. So it's like, you look at it now, and you look into how the slave trade happened and how they forced it upon you, and how they basically had to dehumanize you and strip you of everything you knew, because that was how they were going to get you to follow their faith. So I had a violent reaction to it after learning that, because it's like, how do I, as an African American and an Indigenous woman, feel all these things that I felt naturally as a child and then grow up in that, but then I'm being force-fed this religion that I feel like I honestly feel Christianity was someone taking the best parts of what you're supposed to be as a natural human being and bastardizing it into an organized religion and saying, okay, this is what you're going to do. You're going to be in this building. You're going to give this certain amount of money a month for, you know, tithing. You're going to do this in offering, and you're going to do what I tell you to do based off this book. And then there's a lot of other extra stuff in there that pushes an agenda that's just wrong, like telling a woman what she should and should not do, and in the most misogynistic way possible. And then condemning people for things that they cannot change, or they don't necessarily have full, complete control over, like their sexuality, or them being, you know, deformed in some ways. Like, there are so many things I've heard growing up with religion. And so I just couldn't grasp onto it. But I've always been a spiritual person. I've always felt like there's something bigger than me. There's some higher presence there. And I just want people, when people talk about religion, to me anyway, I've always been like, okay, well, do you even understand the history behind, you know, what you're involved in and what comes with that? So I hate when people try to like force it on other people, or try to condemn someone because they're not a part of what you're a part of. Like, that's no way to judge someone. I mean, look how we got treated, because it wasn't because they wanted us to be Christian. It was because they wanted to gain access and power over us. And if they could control us, then they could do whatever they wanted. So that's my 2 cents on it all. Sorry, it was long-winded.
No, this is good. This is good. Definitely. Thank you for sharing.
I wanted to.
And like you said, they didn't care nothing about, if they thought you were less than a dog, you know, you were property, they did not care about your salvation, you know. It was just their
and
way
Black
to keep
them
you
was the worst thing.
Yeah, to keep you under their foot, period. Well, you don't want to disrespect the master, you know, because in the Bible it says that we have to be good slaves. Them days are over.
Yeah, they wrote that in there. I mean, it even shows how so like I pulled up something that I read back in the day about Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century. He later theologians used Aristotle's argument for natural slaves to justify the New World slavery, which was basically an ideology to help them enslave Blacks because they didn't want to enslave whites anymore, and they wanted to be all one. And that's how, you know, race got started, being able to classify people based off of color. So now you have New World slavery and how it pertains to the African body.
Are y'all gonna do this again now? Then y'all know how long I talk, damn it.
No, I just wanted to make sure.
Comment.
I just wanted to make sure
Like, what's going on?
I just wanted to make sure she was done, because I know I started to say something and then Erica was talking and I was like, oh wait, no, I didn't wait long enough. But I wanted to tie in, because what Portia just said reminded me of when I was talking to my grandfather last month, before I wrote that piece, when I was writing the piece about the police and him integrating the police department, where he was talking about, you know, he was like, when it came to going back to the precinct, he was like, you know, I'd walk into a room, he's like, you know, everybody would get quiet. He's like, so I knew, you know, they had been talking about Black people clearly, or else they wouldn't have stopped talking. But he was like, and when I would stay, because he did have some, I guess you call them allies or whatever in the department, who kept him, like some of his superiors who let him know, you know, these are the conversations being held behind your back about stuff. But he was like, I know that when I'm not there, then when I wasn't there, they were talking about Black people. He's like, because when I was there, they were talking about white people. He's like, they would isolate them first by religion. I was like, so it's still, and I mean, I didn't go down the colonialism and religion road with him in that session. That will come later, I guess. And some asking him some other things, but and bringing this up, it just really kind of linked it together of like, when you quote unquote take race out of it, or like the kind of siphon that aspect away and look at how people of European descent treat each other, they still find ways to subjugate other people. And that's something I have hard conversations with my Jewish friends about. Because I'm like, y'all really out here, especially Jewish people here in the US, it's like, y'all really love to affiliate with whiteness, but like as soon as some anti-Semitism pops up, then all of a sudden you remember you're a minority. You already just keep staying and being the minority, even though, I mean, most people at this point here in the US are more European than like ethnically Jewish, but
yeah,
that's a whole other ball game of conversation. But
yes,
I've been working with people on that. And some are getting closer to the lights, and some are still holding on to whiteness for dear life. But it really, like, that's all the kind of stuff that like swirls around my head when I talk to people about like religion and race and like how the structure of the US is. Because I'm like, y'all, but like, if it wasn't us, it would still be y'all. Y'all would be in like, and then, you know, the Italian, and then Catholics, and then like it does not end. So just, you know, come on over here with us so we can just smash this here white supremacy and keep it moving.
Can I just go ahead and name and throw in the doctrine of discovery? Because that's been like my main talking point for the past 3 weeks. I'm just like, the doctrine of discovery is responsible for all of this. The racism, the whole construct of race, I'd almost argue. But that's the one document that's been used to invade, enslave, and murder indigenous people around the world. And where did it come from? The Catholic Church in 1452. So I don't, and people look at me all bug-eyed when I start talking about it, but it's the truth. I mean, you want to look back and you want to find the source of the transatlantic slave trade and the genocide of indigenous people around the world. There it is. Read it. It's on the internet. That's all I have to say about that.
You know,
You gotta
people
actually
don't like
get them to do
reading.
it though. That's the problem. White folks don't like to learn about their own history. They just go off the stuff that they like that benefits them. I've sat in a peer group full of Blacks and white people, and more Black people know their history than white people know theirs. They're not gonna sit and do it. You gotta force them or basically put them in a position where they feel, they feel like, okay, let me go read this. Like, what are they talking about?
What's interesting, can I just jump in? What's interesting is that a lot of these so-called people, they cling to the Confederacy because they feel like that's their history. You're taking our history, And I'm saying to myself, okay, that could be put in a museum somewhere. We don't have to walk past it every day. Because
Exactly.
I know what it means to my people.
Yeah.
But if in their head, a lot of them think that's my history. You're taking my history. You have more history than that Confederate flag or that Confederate statue. You have more history than that. But they see it that way. Some people see it that way, like we're taking their history by knocking over a Christopher Columbus or Andrew Jackson statue.
And it's wild, especially with the statues, when them talking about, getting rid of their history. I'm like, you don't even know the history of the statue, and that it was not like it was built right after the person died. Like, they're still, you could argue relatively new if you like, as far as history is concerned, they are relatively new. And when they were erected, come at very ironic points in time.
You guys, check this out.
Saying ignorant for us. They don't.
Yeah. So you guys, check this out. So I will say this. White people, we've had this discussion before. Basically, the United States of America is a myth. All right. It is something that was it was something that was created from somebody's mind. And even white identity is a creation. They don't practice and they don't live their ancestral way. And I've always found it interesting, especially and I'm just going to speak for the African-American community, how African-Americans sometimes cling more to the concept of freedom and liberation more than white folk do, more than white society does. And that ties in even to Christianity. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but according to Pew Research, all right, look, according to Pew, all right, 8 out of 10 African Americans prescribe to Christianity. That means you're talking close to 80%, all right, of African Americans prescribe to Christianity. Whereas white people, I think it's like, was it like 50-something, 58, 59%? So you're telling me that we're closer to the 100%, and they're closer, you're talking about 50%, so a little bit over half of white people prescribe to Christianity. And we're like, and what the hell, where the hell was I going with this? The whole point I'm trying to make
it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me if you know the history of what, so like from my perspective, as a part of colonization, in the 1500s, and as a matter of fact, the whole 1500s, particularly here in the United States, right?
Yeah.
They were in the South and they were warring. We don't get the history of the United States until 1600,
Mhm.
because they don't want to talk to us about what happened before 1600, because before 1600, it was nothing but wars and they were losing.
Mhm.
They-
Yep.
and so how did they gain control? And that's why I say from a historic perspective, it makes sense, because the colonizers weren't able to fully establish a colony here until they bought the missions with them, until they hid their agenda under the banner of Christianity, to where in the beginning it was this process of adelantados, right? We're going to just take the property and take over. They kept losing. The colonies wouldn't survive. It was like 50, 75 years, still no colony here in, North America, particularly the United States. But once they start bringing those missions in, we as an indigenous population are spiritual beings in general. And so, and again, even the Africans, as melanated individuals, we are spiritual beings. I'm going, from my perspective, that's my general take of the world. And so when the colonizers hid their agenda underneath the mission, the missionizing of the indigenous population through religious practices, and then indoctrinating them into cultural practices. Now we're talking 16, 17, 18, 19. Now, again, we 400 or 500 years plus into this reality that we are spiritual beings, and our spirituality has been replaced with Christianity. And that replacement occurred because they weren't able to beat us at war, but they were able to manipulate us through our spiritual practices. And so that's why it makes sense to us, to me, because they're not religious.
Mhm.
They're warriors. They're warriors.
Yes.
We're religious. We're spiritualists. And religion is just the name and the tag that they give to how they practice spirituality. But that's just my take on it.
You better say it,
something?
Tavis. You
Yeah, no,
better
I
say
was
it.
saying, y'all, if I'm the only one over here like losing it. I swear to God, if y'all don't see y'all damn give this man some props. I'm like, I mean, yes. Yes.
I must admit, that's all my mama in me, y'all. So I'm gonna throw it back to the women again, because this is my mama. But
That good word of the mama.
yeah, she around here somewhere. I'm gonna bring her in. But so with that, if for the Black population, African American, whatever, for the colored populations of the Americas to fall under the banner of Christianity at a larger rate than the European, if you know history, you would expect that. And so what we need to do is analyze for our Christian brothers and sisters. Again, for me, you are what you are. You practice what you practice.
Mhm.
Be a good person, and we can talk. However, with that, until individuals are, especially when you start messing with people in their religion, man, it's like messing with people in their race. You know what I mean? Look, you're almost, confronting their deepest and most foundational principle of identity.
Yeah.
And that
Yes,
identity has been taught to us by our colonizers.
Exactly.
And so the conversation from my perspective is one of homogeny. All right, listen, I'm not necessarily invested in the religious practices, but I can respect you, because if that's what makes you a better individual, if that's what helps you to help the next man, then so be it. But if that's not what you're doing with this religion, then it's time for us to start calling you out on it. And whatever spirituality, whatever spiritual practice that you follow, well, what are you doing then? And how does this cultural practice, this spiritual practice, this religious practice assists your family, and can assist me and you as we move forward to try to build this community up?
So Tavis, I'm going to jump in because I'm going to say everything that you said I agree with and is great. I'm going to challenge you, not you, but I want to, and it's not a challenging, it's a question that I have is, because at the end you said, you know, you can do what you do, practice what you practice. And I believe that is the way, in the melanated scheme of things, coming from who we are as Indigenous and African and those of the African diaspora, we know that that's the way things are supposed to be because we were a people that lived that way. But we're not dealing with people who think that way and who believe that way. We don't,
Nope.
that society doesn't function that way. And so what does that mean for the Indigenous and the African American community, specifically regarding of who we are as a people? How are we going to find our correct way if we are prescribing to Christianity? Because remember, at least for African Americans, the African American identity is a made up one. Like if you are African American, the identity that you walk in is a survival identity. And in Christianity is a strong foundational component of it. And so, and in order to get back to what it means to walk in your indigeneity, it means you've got to let go of Christianity. You've got to let it go. And so what does that mean for us as a community? And in trying, especially because you know, at least, you know, I know your African part knows, you know, the Black community, the minute you talk about stepping into something outside of it, like out of all people, we are clinging to Christianity for freaking dear life.
Can I say something real quick? I'm thinking of Santeria right now. Can someone touch on that? Because Santeria pretty much is, you have the Christian aspect of it, which is the surface. And it's like what they're really practicing is behind the scenes because of the oppression and things of that nature. So can someone talk more about that belief system?
I was going to, just to wrap up what I just heard with respects to the larger community of Christians. I would say this, I'm about to hurt a lot of people's feelings with this one. Islam was actually brought here by white people too.
I ain't shocked.
So, and so the dynamic,
Not hurting my feelings.
Yeah, I know.
My feelings are not hurt either.
I know. They screwed up Africa, damn it. They are part of the problem too. Don't get me started, them motherfuckers. Don't get me started. Yeah, because if you know anything about Islam and Christianity, walk the same damn walk. And that's a conversation that Black people don't like to have. But go ahead.
Okay, and now my point was that to pick on one religion over another, and I cannot answer the last question. I just wanted to just acknowledge the reality that until we're comfortable with being able to be okay with a segment of our population being there mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and then have these open conversations where the Christians, right, and the Orthodox religions don't fringe us into this corner where we are segregated from because of our dismissal of colonizers' way of spiritual practices or religion. I mean, I don't know what else to do except to ignore that and keep on developing these conversations that I see go from 2 or 3 people to now 7, 8, or 9 people. That's the only thing that I would say. But I don't know anything about the hidden practices and stuff like that. So somebody else gonna have to jump in on that.
For Santeria, that's interesting you brought that up, and I that kind of goes along with I want to loop voodoo into that too, because I think the problem with practicing spirituality like that is because white people have interpreted it a certain way. Christianity has interpreted it a certain way, and you only hear about about the blood sacrifice or like that it's evil, and so there's just this negative connotation to it because people don't understand it, and you're only taught like quote unquote the evil parts of it. And I actually think jumping from Santeria to voodoo, but I thought Princess and the Frog did such a good job of like showcasing that.
I just saw that once again last week for like the 10th time. I love that little movie.
It's so good. But I mean, they kind of showcased, like with everything, the balance of the universe is you have like lightness and darkness, you have the good and you have the evil. So I think that's the case with everything. Like nothing is just 100% evil or bad, so.
But how hypocritical though, because the same practices that they condemn, they do. I mean, we talk about in the Bible about blood sacrifice, but what did they do in Egypt when the plagues came?
Oh.
Those are in the stories of how they would rub blood across the door frame to prevent the spirit of death from coming in. And it's like, or they talk about the oils and the crystals, but when you go get anointed at the altar of church, what do? They put a cross on your forehead and olive oil.
Candles.
They give you holy water. And it's like, exactly, they burn candles. They do all of these things that they condemn these other cultures for doing. Like it's super hypocritical. It's just because they want you to follow this one way and abandon your natural beliefs. That's why I said what I said earlier.
Yeah, you just hit on hypocritical. This is Michael. I'll just step in real quick.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, how are you guys doing? And I just posed a question in chat really because it's something that I wrestle with all the time, which really speaks to if they're so confident in their faith systems, why are there so many denominations in this country? Okay, because if and also what relates to that too, I think, is what I perceive anyway, is a competition between these entities, which again, looking at it through an indigenous and historic lens, is foreign to us as well. When you look at the Catholic faith and their whole, I'll call it a mission statement really, is to quote unquote save souls or get people to convert even from other faith practices. You have to ask yourself, what is the motivation in that sense? So I really look at that, very critically. I grew up primarily in a, we'll call it a Christian based family structure, I would say. My Aunt Laughing Woman still runs a spiritual center and love my aunt to death. And my uncle who passed away also was a pastor and followed, I won't say born again Christian, but definitely Christian faith, and believe very strongly in Jesus Christ and the things that are practiced in, we'll say predominantly white churches. But I've always asked, and I can never get a straight answer from anybody from the religious or the organized religion communities, why is there such a competition? Why are there so many denominations if, generally speaking, everyone is supposed to be, believing in the Bible and believing in a spiritual practice? Because to me, it seems to conflict with indigenous spirituality to some degree, which as a mixed person, which I am, it tends to be, a constant struggle. And the answers I get, and again, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to anybody, and I actually believe this myself, which is to, pray in your own way and seek an answer. But I tend to get worried about faith-based religions in the organized sense because of ulterior motives. I'll tell a quick story and then I'll shut up, I promise. It was, I used to attend a church. I lived for approximately 12 years in North Carolina. And I happened to open up, when I first moved down there, the Yellow Pages. That's when we actually had phone books, right? and counted the number of Southern Baptist churches down there at the time. And there was over 150 listed in the Raleigh area alone. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, okay, well, I have a choice. And I look at, like, say, Catholic, Lutheran, or Protestant churches, and there were exactly 3. I don't know if that's changed today, but that's the way it was in the 80s. So I joined a church, Southern Baptist, and I decided, because I've always had a problem with my weight, trying to keep weight off. I joined a karate academy, martial arts. And prior to me doing that, I was always invited to, fellowship and, the whole things that, many churches do practice. And as soon as I had joined that karate school, they basically told me that was out of line with the practices of the church.
Wow.
because it promoted violence. And suddenly, like a light switch, I never got invited to fellowships anymore. And,
Wow.
they didn't cast me out in the sense like bar me from walking into the building the next Sunday morning. Right. But it was still the same effect in my book. So there was that. And then lastly, and this is what made me actually leave this church, the gentleman that brought me in was a deacon, and, really nice guy, and never complained once about his health, which I wasn't aware that he was fighting cancer. He eventually took his own life because of the pain that he felt. And the very next Sunday, the pastor got up in front of the congregation. Everybody was close to this guy, really close, as was I. And I hadn't been in the church all that long. And he proceeded to tell everybody that it's really sad that he's gone, but because he took his own life, that's against the will of God, and now he's in hell.
Wow.
So how do you tell
That's crazy.
your people, largely white, this kind of thing? And so it couldn't sit right with me. So that really, it really made me have to walk away from organized religion in that sense, not away from God per se or our creator, but people and man have a very weird way of sort of trying to put their spiritual practices in a box, if you will.
Mhm.
And so it was always just something I had to be wary of since that time. And that's kind of where I still sit today. So, but anyway, thank you for letting me share that. But now I'll shut up, as I said.
Don't shut up, man. We be cussing and everything. Say whatever you want. You can go for as long, do whatever you want. As long as you're contributing, it's all good.
Yeah.
No, oh, go
But
ahead.
it's just a hard conversation, at least for me anyway, to some degree. And then so when people judge you, if your spiritual walk is simply, just that, I have a one-to-one with the creator and someone else can't accept that, I don't know what to tell you, other than
so colonized.
Well, that's the basis of it,
Yeah.
And I think when I first got in the room here, I think you guys were still maybe talking about Christianity from a historical sense, maybe Columbus, I don't know. But, what I always tell people, especially what's going on right now, every time there's people protesting against the removal of a Columbus statue, I'm like, all you have to do is read his journals. Okay. Yep. If you read his journals, you'll see what a murdering MFer he was.
Yes, a rapist.
Especially against, brown people.
Yeah.
So, I'd like, and I'll tell them, I'm standing here in front of you, or there's a microphone because they have a PA system. You tell me your rationale for it being okay to murder other people in any context, especially if you're basing it on a spiritual walk. Mm-hmm. You tell me how you can do that. Mm-hmm. And so generally they'll fall back to the, well, you're taking away our history.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
Well, that's not an answer to what I asked you, Mm-hmm. So they usually don't have an answer to that. And, and so I don't know. I wish them well, but I, they won't convince me that way. So thanks, guys.
I was going to share, this is Sean Ironmaker, Hamidagiabi, hello relatives. So I was just sitting here listening as well, just to share a perspective from like the northwestern part of the United States with the tribes, like the tribes where I'm from in Montana and North Dakota, South Dakota and such. For me, I grew up Catholic. My mother was a real staunch Catholic. both my parents were boarding school children, so it was forced religion. And, I guess maybe generations, their generations of people that are probably in their 50s to 70s now, they're broken in respect, when it comes to understanding where our ceremonies and traditions come from. Everything that we learned, we had to do in secret. And so,
Yep.
what's
Same here.
What's unique about it is that, like, our people, in our ceremony, we do have a spirit that we pray to, that is Jesus. We believe in Jesus Christ, and so and we call him Eagle Feather Man. And so there is that significance with that present. However, I don't know if that formulated from the early parts of the Christians coming, I guess. All reservations in that area of the country are controlled by the Jesuit sect of the church.
Yep.
The Jesuit, just from my understanding, that sect was formed after the like when there was when the Knights Templar were still active, and one of their generals, he was a murderer. Like, he would cut people's heads off and impale them, and so for his forgiveness, he was given the Jesuit sect, and so they rewrote the rules for their military, and then moved that sect to United States, and then their first formulation was on the Indian reservations, and so they were trying to tame the savages in this respect. So we had no choice. And then even like me, when I was growing up, from Head Start to 8th grade, I had to go to Catholic school. Back in the early 70s and 80s of the United States, in our area of the country anyway, we weren't allowed in public school, so we had to go to Catholic school. And the JOM program, the Johnson O'Malley program, from like 1934, finally included the Native American tribe around maybe 1973 or 4. And then they moved it from the Bureau of Indian Education to Johnson O'Malley. So then schools were given that, school districts are given that opportunity. Hey, for every Native student that you have that goes to school, we'll give you $3,000. And that's still the same thing now. So those full-time enrollment funds that all these white schools get, and then they treat us like crap. You got to turn around and ask them that. It's like, you guys are taking, our money in that respect. That you're taking money on behalf of us, and we deserve a quality education. So again, education, religion. So it's just really unique that there is that big question that we got to ask ourselves. The Jesuit church and the Catholic church in the area of the country, they've come upon so much criticism now with the bad things they did to all the Native people. Most of the missions are closed down on the reservation now, and then our fight with the church now is to get the land back that their churches are on, and but they're bankrupt. So they're still trying to figure that out, how they handle all the missions, on the reservation. So I just wanted to share that little bit of history, and then those points of view of that Christianity, and then my question would be to that, where does it come from with our people, where we have a belief in Jesus, and so where did that begin? So that's the question I always have.
Well, can I add to that really quick, Sean? So I spent time in Minnesota, and I was talking to this Anishinaabe elder, and he had served in the military, and he'd actually converted to Islam because he served in Cairo for a couple of years. But we were talking about that, and he said something about Jesus spending time with the natives, and then he called him by a different name, but I forgot what the name was. It was in his language, but I'm just like confirming that I've heard Jesus in the stories before.
I'm gonna tell you, I really believe that Jesus, y'all, we need to keep repeating how that ain't his real name. I really believe that this and I'm gonna say spiritual entity that we call Jesus. I really believe that this spiritual entity that is Jesus is probably in every indigenous or Aboriginal spirituality, but the spiritual entity has its own, has his, I guess his own name. You know what I mean? Like, he has a different name. And I think that unfortunately with Christianity, they've perverted, spirituality. Actually, what they've tried to do is erase spirituality, but I think that what they've done is that they've done such damage to spirituality that us trying to conceive Jesus not looking like a Borgia, you know what I mean? Or of what we think like what Jesus should look like. We can't fathom the fact that Jesus probably, because I believe that too. I think that Jesus was a universal, or to some degree was something universal in all Aboriginal cultures, and it's just that we don't know, because of colonization, the role that quote unquote Jesus, that's not his real name. We just don't know what that role and the name was.
Yeah. I totally agree. I believe the essence of whatever that spirit that Yeshua or the Christ consciousness or whatever you want to call it, I believe that everyone has experienced somewhere globally this essence, this love. They may have called it something else. They may have carved an image and it looks differently than what they plaster on all of these churches these days, the blonde hair, blue eyes. I truly believe that essence of that love, others have experienced it. They just called it something else.
I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, I wanted to so again, it's the essence and not necessarily the name of the individual or what we call them or whatever title. The point from my perspective, again, I grew up as a Muslim, right? And so, when I think of Jesus, I call him by his Islamic name because he all through the Quran, but that's another point for another day. For me, it's like, okay, the moralities, the ethics, the compassion, the man that is being exemplified, or matter of fact, and I know sometimes we don't like it, but the human, whether male or female, that is being embodied, that has offered themselves to the collective group of us, supposedly, as a means for us to try to reach or to be better, is what is the point for me. And so, and that's why it doesn't bother me anybody's personal religion, because if you can get to that space where, okay, we're moving forward to try to be better people, to try to treat our brothers and sisters and cousins, those of us that may have a different ethnic or cultural background, may look different, may have a different color skin, no matter what, right? The poorest among us, right? If those principles are principles that are indigenous principles worldwide, at a fundamental level. And so some people don't want to be considered spiritualist or religious, however, can you still respect your neighbor? Can you still respect us? And can you still have the compassion in yourself and in your heart to want to be better than you were yesterday, even if you were the best that you could be yesterday? This is it, right? So without the big names, without the system being placed upon the practices or the spirit, the ritual or whatever, we call it whatever we want. If we can, no matter what they call it, see a part of us and that in our neighbor and say, hey, listen, let's do this, let's do that, then we following what Jesus or Imam Isa or anybody would call, Yahshua, whatever you want to call it, Jesus, whatever you want to call it. Let's just make it work, right?
But my thing is so here's my thing, and I swear there's every ounce of me that wants to be really raw and honest about this aspect.
Please.
I didn't know. I don't think they're out there, they're ready. What I will allude to is that I find it interesting how, and I truly believe that the essence of Yeshua was in every Aboriginal space, or at least, so I let me say this. I'm going to say, I believe, based off what I've learned I believe that that essence was in the indigenous space. I believe it was in Africa. I do believe it was in other areas too, but I do question whether or not it was in Europe. And I'm gonna be straight up with that, because here's my thing: they had to come up with Jesus. You see what I'm saying? And remember that Christianity is a European thing, culturally speaking, as well as the formation of it. Because remember, Jesus wasn't a Christian. Jesus was Hebrew, and they took Jesus's teachings, and they're the ones that decide.
Correct.
You know, how it's going to, how the social construct is literally going to be implemented against its own people. You know, even prior to like I want to even say maybe even a century prior to that, they had already started extinguishing out the lives and of the spiritual feminine essence on their own land. Like they're already taking away the feminine essence, the women, the children, all the way down to babies. You know, female babies. And so what happened in Europe for them, because I'm gonna say this, from what I've been studying over my short, I'm gonna say short because I intend to live a very long time, over my short time of life here on this planet, all right, from what I studied, dealing with, and I will be honest with you, since I've been a little girl of 7 years old, I've always focused on indigenous, African, and I'm going to say it was more specifically geared towards Egypt, as well as Asian, geared towards Chinese spirituality. I'm going to say based off what, and then as I've gotten older and dabbled into other people's spiritualities, there was no structure or real structure in religion in majority, I'm going to say on a global basis, until Christianity, and I am also going to say Islam, because Islam and Christianity and Judaism, all of those things, they're basically siblings of one another. If you know anything about religion, they're siblings of one another.
I was wondering when we're gonna get to that part.
So I posted a link in the chat for all you guys, like after this is over, if y'all want to take the time and watch it.
Yeah.
My dad sent it to me because he was telling me, like, look at how similar the story of Jesus is in the Bible to the story of Osiris. And if you go back and you look at history and you look at Egypt and how they basically took their teachings and they took how they lived their lives and they painted this Christianity over their temples. And they took literally everything from Egypt. So Christianity isn't original. It's not something that Europeans just created. It's a stolen religion that they recrafted and remanufactured to be able to gain political access to every part of the world. And they successfully did it. And they used it to push white supremacy. Because at some point, like I said, with race, they realized that they couldn't keep enslaving their own, because you make all white people Christians, then what you gonna do? So now then you start doing class. Now you can't do that anymore. So now you got to do race. And that's why people of color are at the bottom of the totem pole. And that's why I have such an issue with Christianity personally. I have people in my family, people that I love that are Christians. And I realize that not just Christianity, some people need religion to keep themselves grounded. And
that's where I'm at, like with my aunt and my uncle who was passed. It's exactly that's exactly, I love them to death. My uncle's passed, he passed in 06, but you know, I love them to death. But you know, when you get into Christian circles, it just, and I was even more uncomfortable in Catholic churches. Like I couldn't even stay in, you know, and I don't mean that in the sense of going regularly, even just I tried to go in and try to go in and pray, and everything was so like overly structured. Now we will stand up. Now we will sit down. And it was like, whew, no, you know, it was really, I had to leave because it was uncomfortable. But you know, I have so many people in my family that are very much devout Christian people. And as I said, I grew up in it. I was even baptized in that first church that I mentioned. But you know, just organized religion just really scares me today. I'm 57 years old, and it's like,
I would say I've been disappointed over the years.
That's another, yeah.
You said you've been disappointed?
I've been disappointed over the years. Like I said, coming from a Christian background, I understand that there are some people that want the best for you and they want you to experience the joy and the love and all that of Jesus, but then you have others that are very manipulative.
Yep.
And the last church that I attended was a Pentecostal church as an adult, and it was during a recession. I was laid off, whatever. Anyway, 2 years later, they decided to send out a letter to apparently everyone and said, okay, now the recession is over. We've noticed that certain people haven't been giving their tithes the way they used to. And at this point, we should be able to start back and give our tithes the way we used to. In so many words.
Yep.
Right? And I'm saying to myself, wait a minute here. Wait a minute. Last time I checked, you guys are a New Testament church, and you're going back to the Old Testament talking about tithes and offerings. Number one. And number two, we're supposed to be focusing on the poor, the orphans, and the widows, okay? Right? So right now I'm poor. So why are you coming after me for tithes and offerings? I gave that church thousands of dollars. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself right now, but that right there was what I call church hurt. And many people experience church hurt, not necessarily not being able to give as much as you want financially, but some people have been physically abused and et cetera, et cetera. And not saying that abuse is only in a Christian setting. It could be anywhere, but that's supposed to be a safe place, a place where you can feel safe and loved and everything like that. And then later in life, you find out that's not what, you were taught that it was, that's not your safety right there. Your safety is actually to call on source and dig deep and go on your own journey, in my opinion.
But Erica, I'm going to jump in there. But sis, realistically, but for our people, was it not given to us by violence and brutality? Like,
if I might jump in real quick, I'm going to say yes. Like we said before, right? So we got the Jesuits, right? Yeah. The Jesuits were actually the first ones to try to missionize in the southeastern portions, right? They couldn't make it. And again, the Jesuits were they were ex-military soldiers.
Conquistadors too.
The conquistadors weren't necessarily Jesuits, because
some of them were.
Some of them were.
Yes,
as the Jesuits began to grow, right?
Yeah.
But in 1525, right? So in South Carolina specific, right? We talk about the how they forced this thing on us, right? So in 1525, they had this uprising, this indigenous uprising called the Wali uprising, and they they killed all the monks, all of the priests. The Native Americans was like, you know what, forget this, and they went through and they killed all the priests and burnt down their mission, and was like, y'all got to go.
Good for them.
So a little while later, this is 400 years ago, and so it takes time. So about a year later, the Europeans come back, conquistadors come back, and they doing their thing. And this was the first documented proof of waterboarding that happened on American land. They waterboarded one of the chief's sons to try to find out who killed the friars. And then after they waterboarded him and everything, then they went and they killed everybody. They killed the chief, and they hung him and burnt him and made him an example of for the rest of the population. And so my point is that that wasn't the first time that they waterboarded somebody. It was just the first documented proof of waterboarding on mainland United States. But they did use themselves as slaves. As a matter of fact, slave is Slav or Slavic, and the definition of a slave is the definition of what they considered the Slavs to be back in even 1200. It's the same daggone definition. And they treated those individuals the same way that they treat the indigenous populations and every other indigenous population. They just happen to be the first indigenous populations. They enslaved themselves first. And I just wanted to acknowledge that they did this stuff to them first. Where it's not like they so special that they only did this against them, against other people that was not their color. The only reason why it became a color thing was because it was just easier to make money using color than anything else. And that Christianity was a way for the elite. And that's the thing, that it was a way for the elite to manipulate the masses, no matter what ethnicity, no matter what culture. Because remember, most of the times, religion was used as the initial means to establish some kind of a relationship with the various indigenous populations. It wasn't war at first. They couldn't win at war. So they had to come in with religion first. Now today we have this disenfranchisement, not necessarily because of the religion itself, but because of the way that it was used against our populations at all, meaning the collective group. I don't care whether you're a Native American, indigenous, or Black, or African, I don't care what you call yourself, right? The collective, even Europeans. And that's my point, particularly lower income class Europeans. And so for me, y'all know I do public fire circles. We do private fire circles with my own family and our tradition and customs and spiritual practices. But I live in a big city, and we do public fire circles. And our public fire circles definitely can't be denominational, or I have other people come and participate. So it cannot be just one religion or spirituality, nor can I be bigoted or have bigoted tendencies toward not just culture or ethnicity, but religion too. Because when I have our fire circles in Philly, up to 50, even maybe 100 people, 90% of them don't know each other, but they all are participating in an opportunity to come and sit down as a collective. And each of us, and I'm sharing this to share with you our possibility. I've never asked anybody what their religion was. I only ask that as I share how we as indigenous peoples would sometimes set our intentions during certain seasons of the year, I offer you the opportunity to do that as well. Just make sure that you respect others as they perform this act, just as others are respecting you as you perform this act. And so, each individual gets to walk up to the fire, whether they pray or whether they offer something or whether they set intentions, no matter what it is. My point is that when we remove everything and just be us, and we open ourselves up to allowing to other people to share what they do, we wind up with this really beautiful expression of love. And it's it's a learning experience at the same time. And then it becomes a situation where religion is not necessarily spoken of, but it's more of a humanity thing. What can we do to be better? What's going on with you? Hey, we noticed somebody didn't come up this time. Do they need help getting here? And the community begins to develop despite your spiritual or religious practices, tendencies, or rituals. And
Sorry, no, go ahead. I'll finish when you're done. I'm sorry.
No, I was done.
As I was listening to you, the thing about what you said, it's beautiful. Like that is what separates indigeneity and aboriginality from colonialism. That is what separates, and I'm going to say it, us from them. And we don't like to have these conversations, is that they had already started erasing that part of humanity, which you're talking about, a century prior to them becoming, you know what I mean? And then Christianity just really solidified, whatever happened in their history or whatever, whatever. And another thing, as you were speaking, and it dawned on me, is that they practiced slavery, but their form of slavery, even though it was very brutal on their own people, it still is identifiably different to how they practice it with indigenous peoples in African and those of the African diaspora. Also Christianity. When they are spreading Christianity, they don't do it through brutal force. You know what I mean? Like they're not raping and maiming, on this large scale. I'm not saying there may have not been some small little damn villages in Ireland somewhere they didn't, because they were harsh to the Irish. Like when I learned Irish history, it's like when I be learning about African American history, sometimes I gotta get the fuck up.
That's because they look like me.
Because the shit that they did to the Irish, it hurts.
Crazy.
Yeah,
It's
it is like, I ain't gonna lie, out of all white people I feel sorry for, I be mad when the Irish be saying I'm white. I'm like, you need to be on my side. Like, because if you know your history, you shouldn't be
For real.
They're not your friend. All right, you're not supposed to be speaking English. And so, but for the majority of Europe, the reason why there's Easter is because they do a convincing and an influencing to the European populations in Europe on how to get them to come, to roll over to the Christian side. And I think that Christianity is a European thing. Now, maybe they got some of their beliefs and they stole some of their foundations from the Nile Valley spirituality piece, but Christianity is white. You know what I mean? And I see sometimes I'll see people of color go, oh, Christianity is black. No, it's not. All right? Because anytime you're raping women and children in front of their men, and you're maiming and you're mutilating and you're burning religious and spiritual structures, and you're doing these very insidious things to a people, that's not spirituality, because spirituality is healing. It is a very healing component. And I think that I kind of get a little bit flustered with my own people and my own community when I'll hear them try and tie in that, well, it came from Egypt. And I'm kind of like, well, shit, so did a lot of shit, but it doesn't mean it was good. You know what I mean? Well, for people that culturally appropriated our stuff, and that's why I'm trying to, I hope that made sense, because I just listened to,
I'm thinking about Christmas right now.
Girl, again, another European pagan
pick a holiday.
Yeah.
Pick a holiday. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Easter is another one.
Like our what I say is our next gathering to mourn, which will be 4th of July. Right? Okay. All right. So that's the next abomination that we have to get through. But I just, if I could throw some of my own history for my tribal nation, I'm here in Connecticut, so I'm East Coast, and
can I just shout out some love to you? I'm sorry, because I know about the history of your people, them some of them bitches. I'm so sorry, brother. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. And unfortunately, it's a situation where a lot of the country really doesn't know about East Coast Native and indigenous history here, until you, of course, break the border and go to Canada, right? So, but we share a lot of those histories, but I was listening earlier and somebody had mentioned, conquest, based on religious faith, right? And, that speaks directly to our history here. I'll give you the Reader's Digest Cliff Notes. So I'm of the Pequot people, and Mashantucket is our clan, but we were very large at one point. And when colonization began, at least in this area, starting up in Massachusetts, they being the English and to some degree the Dutch, decided that they were going to take lands by force under the guise of being justified in their eyes. You can go back to the books of Columbus on this, right? That they were justified by God. And it did not matter how they took the land. They saw us as being in the way and an impediment. So there were two things going on. One, OS, there's people there. Okay. Number two, they knew right away, based on the number of my people at the time that they couldn't take us by force. So they had to craft relationships with other nations. Now, at the time, there was a political separation within my tribe, and the breakoff tribe became Mohegan. Okay. And so the British took on allies with Uncas, their chief, and said, we need control of the shoreline. We need to kill Sasakas, which was our chief at the time. They never mentioned once to any of the tribes that they partnered with that we're doing this in the eyes of God. And I'm using generic terms. They also employed the use of the Narragansett in Rhode Island. And we had one of our larger villages was in an area called Wethersfield, Connecticut. And in Wethersfield, we had a very large, the archaeologists like to call it a fort, but it was basically one of our villages. And we had more or less, we'll call it fencing made of wood, very tall trees. And they initially tried a front assault. And what's very, very interesting is that, now here's where we can bring in some archaeology, I suppose. Our people were so strong and being able to hold them off with, spears, arrows, shot from a bow. Inside of that particular structure, that village, they were never able to recover any musket balls. Musket balls were the weapon of choice by the English in particular, sometimes the French, but they found plenty of them outside. So that indicates that we were able to hold them off when they realized that they couldn't take us by force. And mind you too, and this is credit to our indigenous relatives, they also did not breach that border. Why? Because they said, we didn't sign up to kill them. We're signed up to show you where they were. So you guys go in and have at it, Hoss. Okay. And they attempted to do that. So when they couldn't do that, next best thing, light some torches. And they started to burn our villages. And the aftermath was some of our people survived. Sasakas also survived. This is still a mystery to this day. Where did Sasakas go? I believe he went farther up north to Iroquois. I get very emotional when I talk about this because these guys, this history. What I explained this on our radio show a few weeks ago, that the aftermath is me driving through any town here in New England, especially towns that have old colonial houses still standing that have been restored, and that they still have their establishment dates of these homes on their houses. And so this was all of our land. This was all Pequot land. This is why I'm so passionate about getting acknowledgement agreements in place, so that anytime a governor makes a speech about whatever, that you acknowledge whose land you're on in this country. And obviously that's slow to adopt, but there are some people starting to do that. But a lot of that started here on the East Coast. The only skirmishes that are older than what happened to my people happened in Virginia. And then everything transcended from that point. So the English and the Dutch were not our friends. And, sadly, the Mohegan Nation, which is now 10 minutes from me, we've made restitution since then. We have ceremonies every single year now, starting with the mark of 300 years since this whole thing happened, as well as with the Narragansett in Rhode Island. But, our people still stand. There are still books. My father found a book in a museum somewhere out west that stated that the Pequot Nation was extinct. And he said, well, he got a hold of the museum curator and he says, I would like you to remove these books from our museum. He says, because I'm a Pequot, I'm standing in front of you. He said, your book is inaccurate. And they did. They took it down. They did this under the guise of, we're allowed to do it because it's okay in the eyes of God to indigenous people. Why? Because we know later on, and this is where we share our histories with African slaves, because we were property. And we were not considered, we're never considered equal, but we weren't even extended. And this is very important that it gets conveyed this way. We were not extended citizenship to the United States until 1927, I believe. Not that long ago. And we were never considered equal at that point. And it's just kind of, like I said, it's painful. It's historic trauma in that sense. And that's really was my point about, having to look at houses today. That every time I see a placard with, 1600 and something, 1700, 1800, I look at that and I go back and I say, this is, your house is standing on where some of my people are buried today. And that's also why land acknowledgement is important, and that you can carry that whole mission all the way across the country, because the histories in that sense are exactly the same. They may have packaged it differently. They may have done spinoffs. Oh, and the other point that I wanted to make was, back then when the first contacts were taking place, they weren't calling themselves Catholics. They weren't calling themselves Christians. They were calling themselves Puritans. Now you think about the name Puritan. Pure of what? If you're murdering people, all of your Bibles that they rely on as their text of being as close to God as you possibly can says you can't kill them. You can't murder them. But history definitely tells a different story. So, it's very, very hard. It's very, very hard to look at history and even have conversations about religion in that context, at least, without having, you can't, in my opinion, in this country, you can't talk about religion without having that discussion of that history, both, with indigenous and other minorities in this country. And I hate that word too, but you can't have that conversation without having those discussions, like what's happening right here, because you're always going to miss an important part of that history. All the protesting going on right now is a result of people being fed up and being tired, being pushed aside, because they're saying, hey, we've always been here. And now you guys are, doing all these acts of, we're always about inclusion and stuff like this. Driving me crazy today about how suddenly you're going to put me on your talk shows, and you're going to change this policy and that policy. You know what I mean? And then, just to get political for a second, Democrats, where you been? You're talking about like this is new. Nancy Pelosi was up there talking about that this is groundbreaking legislation, talking about taking away chokeholds by police. What, are you kidding me? Where were you?
Michael, did you hear about somewhere down in Florida where a bunch of, I think they were law enforcement. They resigned or something because their leader took the knee or something like that.
Yes.
I'm trying to remember exactly like what happened, but apparently the whole crew was like, we're out of here. You know what I mean? It's like, is it really that deep?
Exactly.
To respect people. Is it really? So you really don't want to respect people. I mean, you're really showing your true colors right now.
Yeah, exactly. There's no will, honestly, for, to change. All the leadership is doing right now, at least in my opinion, okay, it's a smokescreen. All they're looking to do is wait until this passes, then we'll throw a bone, we'll change a couple of policies, and then it's back to business as usual.
Exactly. Crumbs.
Period. End of story.
That's
Ooh,
what
y'all
And-
preaching tonight.
All right. So, that's why, I mean, I won't bore you guys. I won't go off for another hour about the political whole side of this whole thing, but
Keep going.
Boring over here.
yeah. I'm all over the place. Like what I always say is when I get talking, I talk out of emotion. That's why I can't seem to focus on one thing long enough, because we went from religion to politics somehow, but sadly, when we're talking about colonization, it all ties together.
it
And so it's
does.
difficult to have that conversation without randomly going off into 60 different directions,
That's what they use to colonize,
Yeah.
brutality, religion, and our inability to speak their language.
Yep. Exactly.
Up until today, with law and legal legalese, as they
Yep.
say. So,
Yeah.
100% agree with you.
Absolutely.
I was just thinking when you're talking about the history side of things, back in the 1889, 1890s, when tribes were put in Indian territory, we had I guess our own prophet. His name was Wavaka, and Wavaka brought the ghost dance to the people. So as our people were suffering, he brought us all together, and then they would do a dance, or they would hold hands and dance in a circle and sing their songs. And the result of that was the soldiers coming in and shooting them on sight. And and so it's like now we're back to these protests and everything else, but it's just like it just keeps continuing over and over and over again.
Well, it's like the news media keeps talking about, keeps trying to praise Abraham Lincoln. Okay. In a lot of these conversations, talking about what a great man that it was because of him that the slaves were freed. Like, really, Jack? Well, how let's talk about the Dakota 38 plus 2.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, where's that conversation?
Yep.
Because he was a murdering MFer. Okay, 2.
We also need to remember too that when people, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No,
Mike.
no, that's fine.
When they talk about what's his name? Oh, Abe. When they talk about Abraham, I can't remember his name. I'm sorry, y'all. He's just another white man to me. I'm sorry.
with a long beard.
Yeah. When you talk about Abraham Lincoln, honestly speaking, remember, I think people keep forgetting that when the Civil War actually started, the first shot that rang out, it was a fucking accident.
Yes.
It was miscommunication, directional, whatever. And so my thing is, people have sat here and gave him credit for free and enslaved people, but he didn't do that shit at all. An accident happened, and that's how the damn Civil War. I always say our ancestors stepped the fuck in. They was like, "Oh, this son of a bitch scared right here. We gonna get him.
That's it.
So we gonna get his ass." All right,
That's
and I think that's the part of the piece. That's how people in this nation don't know history, or they retain what they think is important to them, and then they discard everything else. See,
I think I don't these days. I mean, I used to go down that road and said, they don't know their own history. My thing is like, I don't give them as much of a pass anymore. Honestly, not with Google and crap. Okay. But everything else, because, yeah, you have to take some initiative. And then on top of that, we already have a struggle in our public school systems when we want to talk about, all right, well, today we're going to talk about Native American history. Really? Where did you learn it? Because if I don't see an Indigenous person standing in front of the room, don't talk to me about Native American history.
Yeah.
Because you can't go there.
Yeah.
And when do they actually have those conversations? Oh, a week before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Right. So
Look, Allie, you already know.
Y'all dropping mics tonight, bro.
Yeah.
You know how I feel about people not knowing information and not knowing what they don't know. Even as a kid, it's like, okay, like I understand you don't want to go and get the encyclopedia. You don't want to figure out which book you need to grab, or if you need to grab multiple. If it's it's got a cross check with the almanac, I get it. But now the Encyclopedia Britannica is on your phone. There's a whole app. And in the time it took you to text me a question or type it on Facebook, you could have typed it in
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know about that though, because people will use Wikipedia and swear they right, and you be like,
Oh yeah, no doubt. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's not
yeah.
that's not the reliable source that you would want to.
so we gotta make
definitely
sure
quote.
I was my cousin, just real quick. I just wanted to make sure that we tell people, look, when we do have these computers, but they programmed to use it the way that we use it. And so I was telling my cousin was telling me that vacuums don't exist. Like, what do you mean vacuums don't exist? Where do you get this from? And I'm gonna ask Siri. Okay, go ahead and ask Siri. He asked Siri, and so many fake websites came up because that's what he follows. That's where he gets his information from. And so to the collective group, I just wanted to just make sure we acknowledge that it's partly our responsibility to make sure that, again, who is teaching us? Where they get that information from? Can we really trust that information?
Even to add to that, I think it's important, especially for the younger generation, not to just look at Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and take that as face value, because people spread misinformation on there all the time too.
I wonder if that's why my Google Assistant, when I asked her if Black Lives Matter, she told me yes. She hit.
Allie, I wanted to say something. When you were talking earlier before we started, like, have we been feeling like, like physically feeling things happening to us? And with everything going on, it's just been building up. And I was telling you, at this point in my life, I've become numb to that. And then I thought about it when you guys were just talking about wars and religion and things of that nature. At this point, there's probably gonna be another civil war.
Oh yeah.
And what comes to mind, I hate to say this, I hate that there has to be bloodshed to make things happen, but I'm thinking about the Haitian Revolution right now. And I'm thinking about how they went back. It's not necessarily back, but they utilized their spiritual power, their ancestors and all of that stuff, and they made things happen. Now, I hate to say it, I hate to put that on the table, whatever like that, but when you're blue in the face telling somebody, look, this person right here did not commit a crime, why are you chokeholding this person, why are you beating this person, why are you spraying this person, and whatever, and then you have the Karens and stuff calling the cops over stupid stuff. You know what?
He looked at me funny.
Exactly. And then I'm thinking, at this point, I hate to say it, but Haiti, they were onto something. Let's just put it that way.
And let me throw this in there too. And that's why when the ghost dance is developed, that's why they came in there. I think innately, I don't know if it's consciously, but I think subconsciously, innately, when it comes to religion and white society, I think that their auras or their essence understands the power of spirituality, especially indigenous and Aboriginal spirituality, and they recognize that if they don't suppress it, that they're gonna lose power. Because if you know anything about Christianity is used against both of our people, and literally they start utilizing scriptures like in Genesis. You know what I mean? They start utilizing scriptures to actually say, you can be, they basically put in this concept of you can be a good slave and be a Christian at the same time. It's used to basically usurp our power from us. And Christianity is let me say this, and that's how you know something janky about that shit. Christianity for white people allowed them to go in and start wars like the Crusades with the Muslims. You know what I mean? Go into Africa, come over here to the Americas and kill, rape, and maim. But when it was imposed to us, it made us passive. And so when we have conversations about Christianity, I'm gonna wait for God. I'm gonna let God handle it. Even though we forget that one little term, God helps those who help themselves, because that's a spiritual concept. Spirituality is a thing of action. It's not just sitting there doing your damn meditations and talking, you know what I mean? And woo, it is also about, okay, as I'm creating, as I'm building, what am I gonna do with this? How am I gonna help my people, myself, humanity? How am I gonna make something better? And Spirit, and I know y'all have heard me say this again, and I'm gonna keep saying this shit. Spirit did not leave us down here to be brutalized and genocided and murdered by other humans.
Yep.
Like that was never the intent when our peoples were put down here, especially because we're natural healers. You know, and that is, I think, one of our probably our biggest and strongest gifts is that we have the potential to be able to heal. I believe that is why things in this nation have been used by the government and other entities that I probably don't know the name of, used to divide the indigenous and those of the African diaspora, because they recognize that once we regain our spiritual power, and that goes with the language, the ritual that comes with it, and our ancestors. Our ancestors, they know that once we tap into that, which by the way, our ancestors that were alive, like the Seminoles and the Tuscaroras, you know, and all, you know, who worked with the African American community.
Yep.
Yeah.
They recognize that once we come together, all fucking bets is off, you know, because with Standing Rock, I see you, Tavis, and I see you too, Lindsay, because I know you've been trying to talk, sis. I will say this, you know that something's wrong with Christianity when you look at even what happened in Selma when African Americans were marching, you know what I mean? Praying, singing, same thing at Standing Rock, praying, singing. And then they were accosted. And so I think that for our two communities, we've got to start having historical as well as just motherfucking logic. I mean, this is not that's my whole thing. This is not a historical conversation. This is a logic. What is it that you are practicing and celebrating and clinging on to for fucking dear life? All right, I'm done, Tavis and Lindsay.
Lindsay, it's really Lindsay. She's been trying to say something for a while. I just wanted to make sure everybody. She just had a Captain America moment, y'all. Did she just use janky, y'all? Did y'all?
Yes, she did.
Oh, have you never?
That's like a Scooby-Doo reference.
Because you know, janky is a regularly used word.
Oh, okay.
That's a Scooby-Doo reference.
It's all right. Shit, damn it. No, I'm sorry.
Lindsay, take your mute off.
I know. Lindsay.
You're muted.
She could have been popping in.
I'm sorry, folks. I wanted to go in and talk about what Portia said a while ago, and we were going back to, talking about how it's like the questions, the religious systems are made so like they're not questioned by people, and like us as spiritual people who are going into the system, and then we're like, how is this? Oh no, that doesn't work for me. But it's set up. I feel like it's set up so it teaches people to not think for themselves, not to question authority. And then that they try to control other people, especially us, Natives and Africans. And when we are coming forth with our gifts, there's something wrong. But I think we're kind of getting to this point where we're all rising past that system. And I feel like it's a really good point. So that's what I have to say.
That's what assimilation is. That's all it is, Lindsay. It's assimilation.
Yep. I was going to add something with what Erica said. You know, when it comes to a civil war, one thing I've been watching the last 15 years in Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, there's a group of white people. Like if you start in Billings, Montana, to round up to Huntley, Montana, all the way to eastern Montana to the North Dakota border, they call themselves the Freemen. And they're buying up all the property, and they're white supremacists. They're militia. They have militia compounds, and they're what in Detroit. They're followers of the National Socialist Party. And so even back in 2016, when Trump was pushing stuff, he was utilizing the National Socialist Party to give him a hand.
Yep.
But at any rate, what they're doing for Christianity in that part of the country is you go to those towns and there's churches popping up now, and they're called Oddfellow churches. So they're Oddfellow Christian churches. And the Oddfellows are a group that was founded in like Baltimore City in the 1800s, and it's a fraternal order, and they're like white supremacists. And so I just want to stress, you're right. We're getting close to that. If something blows up, those folks are going to step in, and it's going to be.
Yeah, Allie,
Yeah.
Allie, I'm looking at the chat on Facebook Live, and there's someone who says Nat Turner was a Christian, but he wasn't a slave. Laugh out loud.
You know what? And I think Nat Turner was Indigenous and African American.
Yeah. From Virginia, right?
Yes,
Right?
yes.
I want to
I'm
make sure
correct.
I got that right. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. If I'm correct, because I don't remember. Look, it's been so long since I've taught U.S. history. Damn it. But Nat Turner, and I think there was a spiritual component, and I think sometimes we don't get that we use these Christianity. What we see now in our communities, realistically, really is way different from when it first starts coming here. You know, and I think we kind of forget that stuff. Like what people sometimes don't understand is that, like, even as Indigenous and African, quote, and now I'm speaking monolithically, as Indigenous and African leadership, whether you want to use the term chief, kings, or whatever, as some of them are willingly converting to Christianity, they are still retaining their Indigenous way of life and spirituality. A lot of times in the beginning, some of this shit is done to appease. And so when they are going into war, like when I hear things like Nat Turner was a Christian and everything, make no mistake, that motherfucker, I'm sorry, brother. That brother was probably, somebody lit some sage up for him. You know what I mean? Somebody did some type of spiritual ritual with him, whether it was his mom, his dad, or whichever community, because he was a part of both communities, whichever. And see, and that's another thing, like, we don't get into these things, you know, about these individuals who come to the forefront and our leadership. And a lot of times people like Nat Turner are tagged as African American, you know, and remember, African Americans, AKA those of the African diaspora, had no souls. We had no religion. We had no spirituality. We are inhuman. And so the spiritual aspect of us is literally erased to an aspect, whereas so is Indigenous peoples, but it's relegated to certain people. And I want to say sometimes maybe even tribes of what's going to be written in the books, what's going to be talked about and shared. And so I think that Nat Turner, I think all of these individuals who led up these uprisings were spiritual. If we can find out, you know, you're going to find out they were very, very spiritual people. And like I said, spirituality doesn't let you lay down like a dog and get fucking killed.
We are spiritual beings, you know,
Yeah.
and just to piggyback off of some of the things that you said, some of the first AME churches established in the South were established so that they could hide their spiritual practices, because, you know, eventually the white man moved, you know, at first when they start opening the churches, they literally had a white man in every church, you know, but eventually the white man left the churches, and the churches was a place that we could do what we do. And so a lot of Indigenous peoples and a lot of Africans, and then a lot of the collaboration of both. Again, I know about Southeastern history a lot, but particularly down there, we would go into the churches so that we could practice our spirituality. And knowing that, they calling it Christian, but we're going to come in here, we're going to be doing this other stuff over here, y'all. So, you know, that public face, you know, and so, you know, for so many individuals that are interested in educating themselves about this history now, and they are getting this information from subjective places, emotional. A lot of people that are sharing this type of information are sharing it from an emotional perspective, so they're not getting all of the facts out, you know, and so we're gonna have to mitigate and be careful as we develop, because it's going to be propaganda being used for individuals to promote themselves, you know. And so for me, you know, when I listened to that, so what, he was a Christian, you know, but I know we're talking about Christianity, and so let's recognize the reality that we use the churches in order to survive. And so maybe the first 100 years of the churches being in place, we weren't using them for Christianity reasons. We were just using them as a face to mitigate and allow us to have our things without their interference. And if you look in indigenous cultures particularly, you'll find that a lot, particularly in South Carolina with some of the first AME churches. Like my family, our AME church was established. It's still there. It was the second AME church in South Carolina ever established. But we know, and to this day, it was used to record our births, to record our deaths, to keep us collective. The pastor name is General. You know what I mean? And so it wasn't something that was based in Christianity, but Christianity was used to shield us and protect us so that we could do other things. And that's something that I want us to remember as we move forward, because that part of history is not going to be told unless we share that history amongst ourselves, because they don't know that we was hiding our cultural expressions and our spirituality behind the mask of this church. But after the church, after 300 years, we'd be like, man, we've been members of the church for 400 years and you practice in the New Testament. Hey, yo, dude, the New Testament wasn't written until 60 years ago. But no, I digress.
No.
Well, that's what I was also kind of touching on with Santeria, because, the whole Christian, Catholic or whatever was like the surface, just so they can not be oppressed or tortured or whatever like that. And then they will match up, I think the Orishas or whatever with the saints. And then that's how they were able to still practice their African spirituality. And that's kind of what I was kind of getting at earlier in this conversation. So very similar to what you're talking about, Tavis.
But the difference is that, like Santeria, Candomblé, and you start getting into those other spiritualities, they now have evolved to where it's very, and I could be wrong, because I think that when you get into the harder places like in Brazil, and I cannot think of that place where it's really heavily African populated, or African diaspora populated, a lot of them mixed. In the end, it evolves, but a lot of them also too still retain this Christian aspect to it, even though they've been able to hold on to some very strong ancestrally African ties. For us as African Americans, we weren't able to do that. There becomes a time to, even though I think the only people who've been able to maintain just a little bit of it have been the Gullah people of North Carolina, of the Carolinas. But when it comes to the vast majority or a significant number of us of the African diaspora here in the United States of America, we don't have that. You know what I mean? Like there is nothing ancestrally, with the exception of, I will say this, maybe of us sometimes dancing in church. And then even that looks very different, or maybe the way that we sing, or maybe it's our vibe of how we've done Christianity. There's nothing else that's really tied to the continent of Africa. Like, you don't hear the drums, you don't hear the hymning. You know what I mean? Like, we don't practice spirituality. We practice a religion. I think that to a degree, we've been able to pull in spiritual aspects of who we are. And I don't want to say maybe individually. I don't have the language for that. But we do not practice. We don't have any type of tie in our churches that say, hey, this is something that we can tie back to Africa. That someone who is African could be like, oh, that comes from the Igbo people. That's tied to the Mende. Like with Santeria and Candomblé, and then you can say, oh, that's, that comes from the Orishas, that's Yoruba. And the Yoruba peoples, like, it's crazy to me. Like, it is really crazy to me. So when you look at the Caribbean and you look at Latin America, for those that practice those religions / spiritualities, the Yoruba had their spirituality had such a large influence. And, and I always find that very interesting, and it's beautiful. but also if you look at like bomba, like the dancing, which has a spiritual aspect to it, of the Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico, like in Luisa, bomba, if you look at the dance that they do or whatever, that is similar to the Senegalese dance, a dance that's done by the Senegalese people of West Africa. And then there's another people that do a dance similar to that. So it's because they dance to the drums and then, well, let me take that back. The drums have to play to the dancer. That's a Senegalese thing, and so a lot of times, because they've been able to retain certain aspects of African spirituality and to a degree culture, they're able to find out and be like, oh, okay, this ties back to the Yoruba people. Oh, this ties back to an ethnic group in Senegal. African Americans, we ain't got that shit at all. Like, there's nothing. And if I am wrong, please let me know, fact check me, but we don't have anything like that. And I think that Christianity has become our spirituality.
Yeah.
It makes me think of what you were saying. It makes me think of, like how I was saying earlier, I'm taking at least these next like 2, maybe 3 weeks, depending on who I can catch, interviewing the elders in my hometown about our home church that I may or may not have left almost 10 years ago. But I know when I was going through the questions with my mom, one of my questions, and I'm just to see how people answer it, is, was your family always Christian? Were they always Methodist? Because in being my mother's child, I like to ask abrasive questions like that. But I in asking questions about it, and like in some of the books and stuff I was looking at the other day, that have a little bit of the home church's history about it. Our church was started in a shed in someone's backyard next door, with one of the men who started it being my grandfather's grandfather. So it was been there since 1895. And so I'm interested to see, because I know a lot of them have the old documents and stuff from when it was started, what stuff was like then, because from what I've learned in bits and pieces growing up is that they had completely different hymnal books, services were structured completely differently, the whole 9 yards. And a lot of stuff kind of went to shit after they joined the United Methodist Conference. And I'm
Right?
very much looking forward to diving into that, especially when it comes to the pastors, because Lord. But, and then going into, like, I asked them, clearly the congregation is dwindling. It's been dwindling since around I left, and my generation being like, nah, we not with it no more, we out. Asking what they love to see, happen to the building, once, let's be real, the doors shut on it being a church. And the first person I asked, my mom was like, oh, they can't do anything with it. The building belongs to United Methodist Conference. And I said, say what?
Wow.
You mean to tell me my literal ancestors, people you remember, helped build this church?
Wow.
Over a century ago?
Surprise.
And we don't own it? So you mean to tell me I can't transition it into a community center? I know that's not what you're telling me.
Wow.
Around. She was like, that's the question you need to ask them when you talk to people about, how Mount Zion was before and after it joined the United Methodist Conference. She was like, part of the deal of them joining the conference was giving up their rights to the building. She was like, and that's the case for a lot of our Black churches in the area. And I said, oh, what? So you got me out here about to burn something down just because if my people can't have it, I don't want anyone else to. But yeah, especially with just learning about how it grew from being in a literal shed to the massive 2-story structure that it is now. I said, you mean to tell me with what that lot would be worth today, we don't own it? Oh, nah. Oh, nah. But yeah, no, I'm interested to see though, like how it was before, getting more information about how it was before joining the United Methodist Conference, just to find out, if there was a more of a connection to at least the culture that was created amongst people who were enslaved, and what the little bits of culture they still had from, you know, from their ancestors from before. But yeah, y'all.
Brianna, keep us informed, because
No.
from what I've been like kind of researching and everything, like when I was pulling up stuff about, you know, crystals and everything, you know, like our ancestors were bringing crystals over from Africa, because that's a healing component that our people use. And you know that they were finding, when I was doing my research, it was crazy, because some of the stuff, some of the findings that they found, some of the enslaved people that were coming from Africa, coming over here to Maryland, actually Annapolis, when they were uncovering their burial spaces, you know, like white people do, you know, they always disturb our shit, you know, our ancestors and stuff. They had crystals and they had cowrie shells and stuff like that.
Yep.
And so I would love to hear what your family's spirit, if you can figure out and find that out, like how did their evolution of Christianity come out? Like, you know, you know what I mean? Like, were they one of those individuals who began out with, like our people, with crystals and stuff? You know what I mean? And then became Christians, or were they automatically, like some of us down south, they would beat the shit out of us so bad we just, you know, you know, and I hate to say it that way, but you know.
Yeah, well, and I mean, from what I've found so far, like I'm gonna do a whole write-up about my church and stuff anyway. And at this point, my grandfather has me writing a book, so like
that's good.
Amina knows. My grandpa has me out here writing a book about his hometown. It's a whole thing happening right now. But from what I found so far, my family's at least been in Annapolis since 1872.
Okay.
But Eastport, that little subsection of Annapolis, you know, a couple miles closer to where you are, but look a little further out, closer to downtown, was very much the epitome of, I think, what was envisioned for separate but equal. I'm learning, as far as like businesses thriving, how people lived, you know, just with, you know, cordially, the whole 9 yards. But there's still so much that's in common with other areas that saw more, I don't know how to phrase it. I don't know, more abrasive relations in neighborhoods. There's that lack of trust and whatnot. Like even now with doing this whole project of talking to the elders and stuff at Eastport, people have been trying to get them to talk for years.
Yeah.
My grandpa included, you know, because they know so much about the land, how stuff has changed and all of that, because our families have been here so long. People have been trying to get them to talk for years. They're like, and it's going to what museum? Yeah. Whose people?
And that's
a no. And they're like, that's a no for me, dog. Whereas I'm calling the same people and I'm saying, hey, you know, I got questions, you know, a lot of stuff from what I grew up with when I was younger is disappearing, getting a lot more whiter, more expensive, whole 9 yards. I was like, I want to know, you know, what it was like, some of those memories my mom has from growing up and all of that. And they're like, oh, okay, you know, I called one, was it last Friday? And I was like, hey, you know, this is what I'm working on and I'd love to sit and chat with you sometime. And she's like, oh, okay, you want to come over Tuesday night? And I was like, you know, I was trying to plan out, you know, one person a week, blah, blah. She's like, oh, well, you know, you come over Tuesday. So I interviewed her yesterday. So I was like, I'm not going to tell you no. I can make time. I can come over Tuesday, bring my mask, you know. But everyone's been willing and open to talk about it because I'm one of their own. Whereas like I don't know, there's so many commonalities between like how other Black communities and white communities have interacted that are common. But even though from what I'm learning, it was a very like cordial and like calm community and environment. So but I mean it's been wild. But yeah, I will say for some tea for y'all that I learned sitting with her last night, at least for the Methodist folks, or even if you're just interested in keeping tabs, apparently the United Methodist Conference is splitting. And
white people splitting again.
I was gonna say it's a competition, right? Here it comes again.
And I think part of it has to do with, you know, how they've fallen on the issue of LGBTQ rights and stuff.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah.
Feminism, but
Okay.
that aspect of it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Race and
And I
sex,
guess
so
with
break it
just-
up.
Right.
Yep.
Well, and like
Yep.
dwindling congregations overall when it comes to like churches and
Mhm.
stuff.
Mhm.
But they're
Competition.
splitting, and
Mhm.
apparently one of the conditions is that at least Black churches will get their churches will get their buildings back, the rights to their buildings back.
Oh, wow.
They won't
Wow.
they won't be assets of the United Methodist Conference anymore. And I said, oh, okay. Well, you know, if I need to find some white people to cut some checks so that, you know, our church, make sure it stays our church, that costs some money, you know, there's a vote being taken on one Sunday, I will make sure I get there. If, you know, I need to be counted, I will, you know, roll up everybody and tell them we go to church that Sunday. You know, I ain't been there in about 10 years. I will show up if you need me to. It means we get the church back.
Look, so I'm going to segue off of what Brianna said, because after you was talking, you made me think of something, and something I've thought about when it comes to housing, but now from what Brianna said, what do you guys, so the church was used, the actual building, I think, was used as a tool also in some type of methodical way to brainwash us, you know, because you gotta have that, you gotta bring me from my house, you know, too, you know what I mean, and bring some instability. And remember that remember for us as African Americans and Native Americans, when we out there with the white man and everything else, like he said, Juneteenth, I like it. We're not safe.
Shirt.
Yeah, I know, right? Right? You know, we're not safe, but remember, all of a sudden now the church becomes our safe haven. It's sacred ground. It's sacred territory. Even though we know that's not true, because we had churches that got bombed, and, you know, not a couple of years ago, we had the individual that came in and shot up the church. But there became this concept, this mindset of what is supposed to be sacred and what is not. And so I've always felt like, as we're re-indigenizing and we're decolonizing aspects of our community, is that our sacred spaces regarding spirituality, I truly feel should, as we start building, look, Brianna, I'm trying to give you like an idea if you're open to it. When we build them, those structures should resemble either the indigenous, and let me say this, because I'm not talking about culturally appropriate, okay? Like I'm saying, like, if you're gonna build something, like it be built in indigenous materials, not that you like build a log house. All right, I'm not saying that. You know what I mean? I'm not saying
you know,
that.
we out here living right by the water, so ain't enough room for all that either.
I know, right? You know, but I'm just saying, but for us, like when we start building things, that they start being built in built in an indigenous way. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I know that if I was going to build an Aboriginal structure that was for practicing African spirituality, you know, and I'm going to use the term temple. I'm not going to use church, because a temple, just like I love the concept of the Buddhist temple. People come in individually and they practice their spirituality in you know what I mean? Like they go and they talk to Buddha, you know, and they light the incense, you know, smoke up, because remember, smoke goes up the prayers. But anyway, you know what I mean? Like they do that, and I shouldn't have said that on live, but y'all know what I mean. You know, like they do it that way. And I've always felt like if I would ever be able to, you know, be able to establish a foundational community for melanated people, that I would build an indigenous structure so that individuals, especially, and I'm going to say African, those that are attempting to practice their indigenous Aboriginal African way of life, that the structure would be built in a way that maybe modeled a structure that was ethnically identifiable as African, or from an African culture, but it would be built in materials, or meaning it would be built being cognizant that whatever it is I'm doing, it is done in an indigenous way of life, if that makes sense. That is not destroying the
it's environmentally friendly.
Thank you, girl, because you know I was struggling over here, right? But yes, it's environment. I love it, environmentally friendly, and it's not infringing on indigenous way of life and belief system. You know what I mean? And I've always thought, like, how beautiful would that be able to be for us to be able to drive in communities or whatever and see, you know, indigenous religious structures, if that's what they wanted, you know what I mean? And for us in my community to do those things too. So as also too, for our people who do practice religion, if they wanted to, if they started to feel uncomfortable, as they're going to start because it's already began, they would have a place where they could transition to and become a part of their ancestral community where they belong, if that makes sense, or where they're supposed to, or where they're trying to be. Y'all know what I'm trying to say. What y'all think about that shit? Because I'm everywhere.
I'm going to throw this out there and say that even within Indigenous communities, I mean, not even just my community, because I'm like smack dab in the middle of the Bible Belt, but also, I mean, I've heard the same thing on the Deneiras, in other like parts of Indian country, that there's a divide even within our communities on like being like the church and spirituality. And I think it's important to note that. But there are organizations, not necessarily spiritual organizations, but there's a place in Minnesota called Memory Keepers, and they're actually already kind of utilizing indigenous architecture. Alaska Natives are doing it up in Anchorage, like the university. The hospital is indigenous centric. The architecture is all indigenous. And so I think there's people that are already implementing this. So there's already places that can be kind of serve as a template for other places to start doing that, even like outside of spirituality, outside of religious context.
The house.
Yeah.
Like, you know how bad I want me one of them houses that I know wouldn't fit over here. But Lord, would I love to live like the Anasazi. Well, you know, with my big ass rug and the fire, you know what I mean? The opened up so I can see the moon. Like, I know there's a way to do it Southeastern style. All right, Mid-Atlantic style. You know
what, I got a business plan in the budget. Now the budget is 2.5 million, but if you help me get the money, I'll build it for you.
I'm telling we can do this shit. I'm telling you, man, if we could get a co-op of 20 to 30 peoples, man, we could, because all it takes, we could do this. It's just like, I would love to be able to, to be able to go to an African-centered temple. You know what I mean? You know, whereas I could, it would just to be in this place and to be able to drive down the street, man, and see that indigenous, structure of my house. Y'all don't, if y'all only knew what was in, if I was a good architectural engineer, if I could show you the layout of my damn house when I get wealthy, because I'm gonna be a millionaire, okay? And so we'll you know what I mean? I'll be a millionaire, damn it. And my thing is
into existence.
A girl, and all I'm like, and all I keep going is spirit. Well, I have looked at one indigenous individual. He happens to be, I think he's Lumbee too. What's his name? Is it Desmond? What's the one that does the house? That does he like does I don't know. We're friends on Facebook. I'll be following his ass, and he be putting up pictures of when he be doing people's houses. I was like, there you go. I said, you know somebody indigenous that knows how to work the inside of the house. I was like, stay his friend. Don't make him mad. Don't say nothing crazy. I was like, now I need somebody that knows how to build a damn house. We can't hear you, Lindsay. Who would you say?
He wants to be on our webpage too. I talked to him.
Yes, I'm like, there is one, there we go. I said, now we need somebody who is either African-American or indigenous that knows how to build houses. Because if you get that component, those are the people we should be calling to build our damn houses, and we can get what we want. You can't keep going to Caruso. Is that what they call Caruso and something? I know y'all know who I'm talking about. On the side where it's like Merrick Homes or whatever. You know how you see signs.
Ryan Homes.
Yeah, exactly.
Homes. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like we have no choice, but if we want to build our own houses, if we have the ability to do it, we have to look at white builders. You know what I mean? Not to say that we probably don't have our indigenous and African-American builders, but we don't know who they are because, we're our nation, even though it appears small, is very vast, And so we only can subscribe to them. And it's like, yeah.
Well, I was on that subject. I know that Sandra, who's been in here a few times, is working on a resource called Find a Native.
Yeah.
on that very thing, trying to locate people that can provide services in certain areas, so you're buying within a community. So that's one potential resource. So I hate to say this, but I have to head out.
know.
I have to go too.
We shutting down, y'all. Don't worry. We shutting down.
Can I make a suggestion maybe for a future talk? I'd like to circle back on the whole Civil War conversation a little bit. And I want to tie it to some recent events. One in particular, just as a teaser. Donald J. Trump, hate to bring him up.
Clown in the White House.
Yes, a fool in the White House, as we call him, or the walking Cheeto with ears. Did a photo op recently in Washington, D.C. You guys might remember this. And in order for him to do that, that photo op, he cleared a path through protesters with what? The military.
Yep.
So as a teaser, that's kind of where I want to go.
Next week, you mean?
With that. Well, it's up to you guys.
It's happening next week because I'm ready.
Because it also ties to church. It ties to the things we've been talking about tonight, because there's some correlation there. I think that everybody needs to kind of remember, because this ain't over.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. I think well, let me say this. You guys tell me, because I was thinking about where to go. And initially I was thinking about museums, because Brianna brought up museums. And I was thinking that might be a good way to go, because that's where all of our history is for a lot of us who are, African American and indigenous, and we have loss of language and spirituality, everything. A lot of our stuff that could be that link to what we're missing is in a freaking fucking, excuse my language, but it's in a museum. You know what I mean? And you know what's even fucking scarier? That shit is over in Europe somewhere. So that's another piece. You know what I mean?
Real quick. Okay. Can I tell a story real fast? Real fast.
Yes.
All right. Whew. My elders took a trip to the great land of Great Britain.
Ooh,
a few years ago to go to the Royal British Museum. And because we had found out that they have in their possession a one of our wampum belts.
Wow.
But this particular belt is significant because it was taken off of we'll call, for lack of a better term, someone of royalty from within our nation. And the way this was described from my aunt was, you are allowed to come into a room and we will put, this is the part I hate, we'll put the item on the table, but you may not touch it, but you may look at it. This is literally how they were talking to my elders and stuff. And my aunt just immediately started praying up a storm right there, because it was like, she said, we all felt the same thing, because, I mean, if you could have seen the beadwork, the way they were describing it, we don't see people doing that today, the old way. I've heard of also stories similar of a way clothing was made up in Alaska too, that had been, well, they call it discovered when they do archaeological digs and things like that. Just the way weaves were done back then, this was very similar kind of thing. And of course, we made a formal request to return the item. This has always been a problem anytime, especially with auctions in this country that happen to occur and go out of the country. And here was their response was this: well, why do you want it?
Oh gosh, why are you about to
because it's not yours.
Yeah, exactly. So
that's what they said to Africa. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Africa.
Yep. So because I thought of that earlier when we were talking about the grave robbing. I work in historic preservation, tribal historic preservation, and then we hear these stories all the time, where they not only take very significant things from our grave sites, but even parts of our bodies, which is just disgusting. I don't know why they do that, but anyway, I wanted to share that because it was just that's a problem. But anyway, yeah, for future discussion, yeah, I think if we could circle back to talking about just to give you an additional teaser. So where I want to go with that a little bit is, if we talk about how some of our tribal nations that are federally recognized, how we are controlled because we are not allowed to form armies. We can have
Yep.
tribal police.
Yep.
Oh,
Okay.
Mhm.
There you go.
They dictate what limits those tribal police have.
Mhm.
But the moment you buy a tank,
Mhm.
I'm being
Shit.
facetious, right?
Mhm.
They
Let
got
me
to
ask you
open arms.
this. I'm sorry, and I am cutting you off because I'll forget if
Yep.
I don't. So
Sorry.
let me ask you. So I know you can't buy a tank, hypothetically. You can't buy.
No,
But
we can't.
could you? Yes, but could you? Because this has been. I'm telling you. Could you purchase something like that from another nation?
No, because of the way, I mean, what was very interesting on that conversation is somebody brought it up before, it may have been Travis. I'm trying to remember, talking about how city police can get their hands on military surplus.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. To reinforce themselves in certain situations, in particular, unfortunately, against our protesters. But the minute a tribal nation or any sovereign peoples, but at us, okay, when they get the impression that we're going to build up something that's beyond the police, here comes the National Guard. It'll start with the FBI. But then it'll transition, depending on if they get really alarmed, it'll transition into the National Guard. If you think about history back in the 70s when they burned hemp fields before they decided hemp, the only reason hemp was approved recently through the Farm Bill was because someone else thinks it's profitable. It wasn't because we wanted to be gracious and give it back to our communities who had always used hemp. My brother Buffalo's smiling. You know what I'm talking about, right? So it had to do with that. By the way, that was signed because of we would commonly refer to him as not Cheeto, but Turtle, which is Mitch McConnell.
He looked just
Washington.
like a turtle.
He does.
Like for real.
Yeah.
A turtle.
Y'all.
But he signed the Farm Bill. And I think hemp's a great idea.
Oh, stop it.
So, but anyway, I'd love to broaden that conversation a little bit. Maybe next time.
Okay, so let me ask you all this, because I will say the museum one is probably gonna have me in tears and cussing real bad. So let's make a decision before we get ready to get off here. Do we want to hit museums next one, or do we want to hit the Civil War? Honestly, they're both very hot.
Civil War.
Civil War, and we've been saying that shit. We're in the midst of it. Well, we're not in the midst of it, but we're in the beginning. We're in it.
Yeah,
we're in it.
I'll try to convince Dave. He's more than my friend. I consider him family. Our co-host Dave on our show, because he's been predicting this forever, that there will be another Civil War.
Oh yeah.
So I think he's been right on it. And actually, and this is more food for thought, one of the things that he always talks about, and I think this is actually accurate too, because we know from an indigenous perspective, anytime they get hot and bothered over something, if it's not land, it has to do with what's under it or a resource. One of these fights that will end up within a civil war is going to be over resources. And one of those things will be water.
It's already,
So, you can almost set a watch on it. It's coming.
Yeah.
So
it's coming, and that's why they're trying to get us out the way. And that's what that's the whole point. And that's why our spirituality is so important. Like, I don't think that for our people on both of our sides who are not practicing our indigenous spirituality, I don't think that we understand the profound impact that will occur in our communities once we realign with our ancestral spirituality, because we are water and fire people. You know what I mean? Like, we just effing are, we're star people, and we're water and we're fire people. And the fact that we are so far removed from understanding how, let me say this, and I know I'm gonna catch heat, I don't give a fuck. Every time I hear sometimes people in my community talk about how we are these original peoples here, I'm like, that's fucking bullshit. Because if we were, when indigenous peoples were out here on these front lines, especially at Standing Rock, we would have been in alignment with it. And now that we know about it right now, we would be out in these streets right now, especially if we knew the shit that was happening with our water supply, you know? And then, and you know, all this stuff, especially with the water. I'm like, they're sitting here doing things to poison us, your water resources, like Flint, Michigan. The fact that, you know, I was like, the fact that there hasn't become this. I hear you, Michael. What do you got?
I was going to say, I'll drop in the email, because I know in the email that we were exchanging, a link to not to be self-serving, but a blog article that I wrote about 3 years ago that talks about how you know, groundwater sources are being you know, harmed because of fracking and other types of things. Because you have right out in the middle of the United States, it was one of the largest underwater aquifers, and they're already running pipelines over the top of it, and everything else that's going on. And that same body of water extends all the way down into Texas. And before he left office, it was Secretary of Energy, Rick Perry, which was a joke and a half.
Oh gosh.
Approved to have a nuclear waste facility parked right over the top of part of it as well. So you have a triple effect in essence. You know, we already have you know, less rains happening to begin with, but then you have the second threat, which is of course the pipelines, and the third again is now nuclear waste that could also affect that water source. And once that water source is gone, I don't know what they expect to do. Ship bottled water in from somewhere else. And that's another conversation. We can talk about the Nestle company.
Yeah, I was you guys, and I was pulling this up. You guys know it's not Nestle though. Who was it? Was it last year? It's only been a year. Who was the water company that was being sued by our government because they were caught tampering with the water source, with the aquifer? And I'd have
to look.
I was effing shocked that it did not get any type of major media. And I'm trying to find it right now. And I know we ain't got this time, the type of time, and I'm going to look it up. But there was it wasn't Nestle though, but they literally got caught. And that's why I'm like, even what's happening in South Africa's water, their aquifer, it is shortening up. All of that shit is because these water companies are tampering with it.
Absolutely.
You know,
or they're just taking it. They're going in, you know, they're securing these, they're going into impoverished communities, and they're securing these ridiculous deal. It's not even impoverished communities. I mean, you know, Nestle company owns over 32 brands of water, one of which is very famous, which is Poland Springs. Okay. And so Freiburg, Maine, which is north of me, about 4.5-5 hours north of me, keeps re-signing a water agreement at something like $250 a year, and they're pumping out in excess of 5 and 6 million gallons an hour up there.
Wow.
And so
wow.
the environment, you know, people, the environmentalists have been ongoing concerns because they're watching their lake levels drop and they're not being replenished. And you know, out west is the same problem. Those aquifers are not being replenished. So you have basically these companies with big ass straws sucking water out, and then to add insult to injury in terms of Freiburg, they turn around and they go, "We'll sell it back to you."
Yes, bottled water.
Okay, so it's like,
if I can butt in really quick before we all end the call. So all of these things that we're talking about is the reason why I started the group that I started with the Indigenous and Black Solidarity. And a lot of us have been privy to the things that are going on in our communities that, you know, affect us as a people, whether we're in poor places or we don't have access to things or the water and things like that. And then right now, specifically with, you know, police brutality and the consequences that come with that. So August 28th, there is going to be a march in Washington. And
when is it?
The 28th of March.
Okay.
Basically, it's going to be
of August.
A march on Washington again. Like
it's August or March?
It's
28th of
August.
Okay.
August.
Okay. So I had the idea that I was talking to Tavis and I was talking to Amina about how the way that our communities are going to come together is through education, of how our histories are intertwined with each other. And the only way we're going to be able to get that point across is if we start to educate each side, because both sides, both Indigenous and Black, are colonized as hell. They're indoctrinated as hell when it comes to religion, when it comes to the history that they're taught. And it's not their fault. I mean, they successfully indoctrinated all of us from birth. So in order for us to come together, that's how we have to do it. So I had the idea for all of us together collectively to be able to descend on Washington and be a group together. Because this is going to be a huge march. This is going to be like the Martin Luther King March all over again. So it's going to be thousands of people there. But what I wanted to do to separate us apart from that was for us to show up collectively as a group under one guise. And for us to don like shirts, if you're Indigenous, have some regalia on. If you are, you know, of African descent, have whatever ties you to your community. But what will draw us together is, you know, like the signage that we will have and the shirts that we will wear. And I wanted these signs to basically have very specific messaging on them about how our culture has intertwined, the things that we've done together in history in the past that have made us successful. Like I told Amina, people love to bring up Black Wall Street, but they never mention how it was built on sovereign land. And something like that being blatantly put out there for people to see will start to plant the seed, like, hey, you know, this is something that we need to start looking into, that we need to start paying attention to. This needs to be a part of the discussion, and it will rid both communities of a lot of issues that are there.
And Portia, and I'm sorry, and I am cutting you in, but don't forget, because I think this is big when it comes to the East Coast, the Tuscarora trails. Like this thing about slavery.
It's not gonna be one thing. It's gonna be all of it. So I wanted like the signs that we will be holding, like the people who are gonna wear, that are gonna hold signs, their messaging is gonna be very like specific. Like it's not gonna be somebody's just in, you know, Kentucky and they want to come over and they're gonna make their own sign. Like it has to be approved by what we're trying to do, because if we're gonna be together, I want all of these signs to basically tell a story, and they all connect. And that's basically how the Indigenous and the Black community history is intertwined, and how we have come from a successful coexisting culture of people, of groups of people, and have been divided by white supremacy. And now we're trying to bring it back together because we have common goals and common interests. And I feel like when these two communities unite, the things like water scarcity and, you know, the degradation of our land, things like that are going to be able, those issues are going to be able to be pushed to the forefront, because you will have the body and the manpower behind it pushing that agenda. The same way Black Lives Matter has, you know, skyrocketed for police brutality, because so many people are joining together and joining forces to bring attention to this issue, and they're not letting up. Like I live in the DC area, protests haven't stopped. Like there has not been one day here without protests. And I feel like the pipeline and water and, you know, issues with unequal education and healthcare and how Black women are treated in, you know, the maternity ward and things like that. Those are issues that if we all collectively together stood behind each other and said, we're not with this shit, it's gonna stop. And we collectively are showing up together to show you that we mean business and you're gonna change this. I feel like things will start to happen the same way they're happening now. So that's why I started the group. So one, for education and to give us a safe place where we can come together and learn. I don't know it all. Most of the people here don't know it all. We all come from different walks of life, but together we can put everything into a pot and we can culminate together. And so that's what I wanted the congregation of us to be on the 28th. So of course it's going to be a march, but I wanted whoever feels like they want to participate, they want to be a part of this history. I don't know one instance, or I can't recall, I mean, I'm young, I haven't been everywhere, but I can't recall one instance where the Indigenous and the Black community have come together at one place
in one
Yeah,
month.
not to the scale you're referring to. There's been little small things here and there, but you're quite right. It's
I mean, I'm sure that there has been, but I'm only 33, so like I haven't seen it in my
Lifetime.
young
Yeah.
lifetime. And I feel
Yep.
like I was talking to an elder of mine, I feel like it's our generation time to try to pull this thing together. Now that we have the platform and we have the attention of the world, we need to do it now. And so that was the basis of me and Amina creating the group. And so I'm going to set up an Eventbrite tomorrow where people can go on and they can access it and sign up on a link, just letting us know that you're going to come. It's not a ticketed thing where you're going to have to pay any money. Just let us know that you want to be with us, that you want to fall in line, that you support this agenda and that you want to stand with us in what we're trying to say.
I'll be there.
We're kind of work to try to make sure that everyone's taken care of, that, we have some resources there. We will sell the shirts, that are going to say, they're basically going to show like imagery of, the solidarity between the two.
Unification.
Between the two communities. And then we're going to march on Washington and we're going to make a statement. And, the imagery that can create on social media will be big. And that's what I want, because it's going to make people pay attention and it's going to force people to learn about their true history and how we can move forward together. Because we can't go forward unless we start to realize what's come before us. And that's been our problem all along. So so I wanted to make sure I said that before the end of the call so people know, so that they're aware.
It's good.
And then when I post them tomorrow, just please sign up. And if you need to reach out to me, feel free to do so, and I can explain it to you or help you in any way that I can.
And share it, Portia, like when you guys are doing stuff like that, because our platforms are similar, share that on here. So as this starts to spread, people will see,
Absolutely.
because I don't know if we have as many platforms like ours floating around, you know what I mean? Like that are both of our peoples talk about unification, but I don't know if there's a lot of, actual platforms. You know what I mean? Where we can.
That's why I wanted to say something tonight, because we've been planning it, but I wanted to make sure it was a complete thought out process and a complete thought before I brought it to the public, because I don't do anything half-assed. So I wanted to make sure I, checked all the boxes before I put it out there. So now I'm comfortable putting it out there, let everybody know this is the first public statement. So please stand with us. Please come out. Please support us. I have some resources. So if you're coming from different states, let us know in advance so we can help you in any way we can. And,
I think that's a good idea, because also, but leading up to it, whatever that established date, well, actually you already have the date established, the 28th, even starting some of that messaging early, so that people and imagery early, because then when you get there, they're going to recognize that, and that education process can start almost immediately once stuff gets gelled up a little bit on social media.
That's exactly what I want. I told Tavis that I wanted it to be like everybody that is with us, we're going to have a defined area, and if someone were to take a picture of this assembly, I want someone to be able to clearly understand what the point is that we're trying to get across without a word being said. So that when they reach social media, it's going to catch on fire, and it's going to spread, and it's going to start planting seeds in everyone's mind to go and do their own research. And then again, in the future, this is just the first instance of things that we want to do. This is just the starting, transition into changing the narrative for our community.
Well, look, this is good, girl, because I'm having a unification conference, October 2021. So I'll be expecting y'all's asses there with your t-shirts. No, I'm kidding. I'll be expecting, because I think this is big. You know what I mean? Like, this is really, because it is a continual thing. And so I think that this is beautiful, girl. I'm all fucking excited. I just want to get out there with my shit on.
Come on, that's exactly what I want. That's me and Amina will be
Yeah,
I've been brainstorming for like the last 2 weeks
I
about
love
the
it.
messaging that I want people. So basically I'm just gonna put messaging out there and then people can come to me with what they, what they
Okay.
know, because I don't know everything.
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna be able to research everything by myself. And then it can
Yeah.
be approved and say, okay, well, that's your sign.
Yeah.
And make sure you got
Yeah.
dates on there, hashtags, make sure it's
Yeah.
big enough, it's legible. And and then we just go from there. Once everybody got what they want, we're gonna go out there, descend on Washington. And
I love it. And can I just say this? This is, and hold on 1 second, ladies, and just everybody who's been watching us, we love y'all. Peace out.